the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you to Alex, by the way. Welcome to the home of common sense. We've got a load to get through over the next few hours. Absolutely rammed at this end. Russia's warned deploying European peacekeepers to Ukraine after a truce would be an escalatory step as peacekeeping talks with the US Secretary are underway in Saudi Arabia. I don't know since when a peacekeeping force was a red flag for escalation, but hey, this is Putin talking, and he's mad. We'll come on to that in a bit. Also, failure to renew the Conservative Party could lead to the loss of our country and all of Western civilization, says the leader, Kemi Badenoch. She's been at a big conference trying to recarve the image of the Conservative Party in the modern age. Good luck with that, Kemi, but we'll look at the story later as well. And the UK's most senior judge has attacked Prime Minister Keir Starmer for unacceptable criticism of an immigration judge who allowed a Gazan family, Gazan refugees, to come to the UK. It's an extraordinary battle between politics and the autonomy of law. Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So what have we got here? How can the West ever trust Putin? I'm going to put it that way. There's a sort of extraordinary... I don't know whether the word is phenomenon or whether it is just a thing or a phase. I don't know what it is. It's PFBDS, Putin Fanboy Derangement Syndrome. There is a school of thought, and I'm really struggling where this comes from, that Putin is kind of the good guy in all of this. He's all right, old flathead, he's just looking after his country. I think the evidence of Vladimir Putin's CV tells a very different and disturbing story. I don't think anybody's surely going to disagree with that. We know that the US and Russia are holding talks in Saudi Arabia. I think this is all really quite iffy at the moment about the war in Ukraine. It's the first in-person meeting since Moscow's full-scale invasion 3 years ago. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov speaking to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Ukraine are not there. Nobody from Europe are invited, which is kind of interesting in itself. The Kremlin says that Mr. Putin is willing to talk at some point to Mr. Zelensky, maybe if the circumstances are right. Mr. Zelensky says we need to be at the table for this. Keir Starmer has said Ukraine peace deal would require a US backstop to deter Russia from attacking its neighbour again. And of course, we know that Mr. Starmer has repeated that he would consider deploying UK troops to Ukraine in the event of a lasting peace agreement. Why did that upset so many people? Why? I think across the spectrum, sensible people, left and right, have gone, well, that would clearly be an option. Starmer's not suggesting it's going to happen right now. He's putting it out there. The Germans lost their minds over this. Scholz essentially said this was an outrage and it was completely premature to mention this in any shape or form. America are rowing back a little bit. President Zelensky is the elected leader of a sovereign nation. Ukraine's leader and government will be told during a visit to Kyiv by Donald Trump's envoy. So they're coming back and sort of go, no, you're not left out. You're not. It's all a bit mad. Firstly, I'm going to ask, I know it was talked about a lot yesterday and continues to be talked about a lot today. I mean, we do have an army. We might have a small one. It might be dwindling. It might not be what it used to be. Being a peacekeeping force is it's bread and butter for the army, OK? Do it all over the world and still do in places half of us have never heard of. But you'll find, the odd battalion stationed in a backwater place just doing that, keeping the peace. That's the point. Why would that be so bad for British forces to be doing that? And one would assume there would be a European kind of, I'm talking about European, not the EU, European as in the mass, the continent, response as well. So Putin is a mad killer, OK? He's a murderous dictator. If you look at him the wrong way, he'll have you shot. If you've made an enemy of him, don't be taking a cup of tea at a posh hotel in London or Paris anytime soon. Or crossing a bridge where a man with an umbrella is behind you. Or putting your hand on a Salisbury door handle because you don't know what somebody's pasted it on. That's how this guy operates, OK? He's a dictator. He's a killer. Why? How does Putin somehow in all of this come out as like, well, he's all right. Oh, Vlad, yeah, he's OK after all. Really? In what capacity is he OK? A man who's invaded a sovereign territory. How can you put some meat on the bones of this? 0344 499 1000. I saw one commentator say, we don't even need to look back to 1938, because in 2008, of course, he was allowed to invade and occupy Georgia. Emboldened by that, he invaded and occupied Ukraine in 2014. Emboldened even more, having been allowed to gain from that, he further invaded Ukraine in 2022. Appeasement creates war. And that's what's happened, right? Literally that. So this tacit sort of green light that's been given to Putin by Mr. Trump, and I think I can see, you know, Mr. Trump's got one thing on the agenda, and that is the United States. Fair enough. He's the president. Ain't that a bit weird? He's got peace talks going on in Saudi Arabia with his representative, his Secretary of State, Russian counterpart. Nobody from the continent of Europe is there. Nobody from Ukraine is there. That is a bit weird. That sets a precedent for something that is very, very wrong. So when people say, what's gone wrong here? Ukraine aren't part of it. Trump was asked at a press conference quite recently, are they an equal partner in all of this? He said, oh, that's a very good question. Not really answering it. And now they've got peace talks underway without Ukraine, the invaded country, being anywhere near. Trump looks at Ukraine like an inconvenience, really. He doesn't really care, I don't think, about Ukraine. He's looking at how he can benefit from Ukraine. He's playing with what he would consider to be the big guys, the guys that can ultimately make the decision. Zelensky can't make the decision as to whether Russia bow out, so some kind of deal has got to happen. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. How can the West ever trust Putin? Just answer that question if you can. What's the bullet point list of how, actually, no, we can trust Vlad? Now, think about it from this angle. I'm not so sure about that. I'm genuinely not so sure how the West could ever, in any shape or form, trust President Putin. And what is the sort of vague... I mean, I might have overplayed it by suggesting it's a fanboy derangement syndrome, but it is a little bit of that. I see it on social media. Not a lot, but a little bit. And I think the Trump position has sort of emboldened that stance that, yeah, Vlad's all right. He's a good guy, right? It's just the Western propaganda that says he isn't. I think you'd find a lot of people in jail or dead that would be great evidence, or invaded as great evidence to why this might not be such a good guy after all. But somehow there is that kind of slightly twisted view that President Putin is one of the good guys. 0344 499 1000. How could you ever trust the guy? Answer that if you can. And by the way, as I say at the beginning of all of this stuff, I can mouth off about how this whole thing looks to me. I stand to be educated by the end of the programme, and you might say, no, you've got it wrong. This is why you've got it wrong. And also, what would be so bad about a British peacekeeping force, along with other nations? This is a very delicate area. And my own sense is Putin, who is looking to expand, if he sniffs endorsement, what's he likely to do? Put his tail between his legs and walk away back to little old Russia, whose economy is hardly bigger than that of the state of California? Might have a few bombs under his belt, but he ain't got much money over there. No, he wants to be a bigger deal on the global stage. Thoughts on that as well? Our lines are open. This is Talk. Let's get a word from Steve N. Allen, who's back with us, the comedian and broadcaster. Steve, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Putin.
Hey, up the Vlad. We love a bit of... There is a thing there, isn't there? There is something on this in terms of the way or a certain group of people seem to have developed this odd respect for Vladimir Putin.
Do you think it's respect for Putin, or do you think it's some people have the tendency to want to try and find the conspiracy theory within, and there's enough information to start to construct one? I chat to people like this online, and they always have information about how much money Ukraine's getting out of this. What? They therefore want to be invaded, or they're somehow prolonging the war? If you want to try and dig deep into it, there are two movements, aren't there? There's NATO as being expansionist, so therefore that's a defense of Putin.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be, therefore, you get to invade another country and take another sovereign country's land, right? That's not, it's a false equivalency, or whatever they call it, a false moral equivalency.
Yeah.
And the one is before that there was some American involvement in an election in Ukraine during the Obama time or something. Again, the result of that isn't, oh, please have some land then. So none of the arguments make sense in defending what Putin's done.
But that seems to, there is this, and again, you mentioned conspiracy theories, Stephen, there's quite a lot around this. And, like all of those theories, once in a while there's a kernel of truth in the, how they start, but then they sort of develop these curious tentacles, and it becomes a whole other story. Zelensky, and as you say, he's lauding it up, he's doing naughty things behind the scenes and enjoying a nice social life, trousering the cash. Look, Ukraine clearly didn't want to be invaded, and invaded they were.
Yeah, and we knew the original narrative was this will be 2 days, bish, bash, bosh, there we go, getting in that, and that's not how it's happened. That's also a part of why I think the narrative has moved in this direction of the Trump and Putin peace deal. We need to watch out for restocking. That's the big fear here, isn't it? It's not about, saying that it's almost a tacit approval or any of these things. The big worry is Putin's in a place where he ain't going to win this. This is just going to go on and on. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that Ukraine's going to win this either. But you hear stories of like some of the Challenger 2 tanks that we're sending over in comparison to the old Soviet kit that Putin's having to use. I don't know, it's not looking good. If we had enough of these tanks to send over, eventually things could go Ukraine's way. But, if you have this period where everyone has to step back and just relax, what's Putin going to do? Just sit around and wait, or restock into a position where he can actually do some more damage? That's the big fear. And Olaf Scholz was terrible in his response to this. Cowardly, almost. Because any of the things that you have to step up and do now, it's probably a choice between doing it now and doing it later, rather than never doing it at all. Yeah. Either you have to make this decision to get involved now when it's in Ukraine, or when Poland's involved.
Let's have a listen then to Keir Starmer on that point, because as we know, Germany have rejected Starmer's kind of tacit suggestion about troops on the ground in Ukraine. Russia has warned against any escalatory steps. So let's have a listen to Starmer emphasising the UK and Europe must do more to support peace plans. Here he is.
At stake is not just the future of Ukraine, it is an existential question for Europe as a whole, and therefore vital for Britain's national interest. On defence, it's clear the US is not going to leave NATO, but we Europeans will have to do more. The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing. And Europeans will have to step up, both in terms of spending and the capabilities that we provide.
It's possibly the only vaguely sensible thing I've heard him say since July the 4th last year, Steve. But there is something in this, isn't there? And it's kind of what he's clearly trying to sort of appease Trump a little bit in acknowledging the American position that Europe doesn't do enough when it comes to defence. But in doing that, he's also slightly upsetting Putin, and America don't want to see Europe getting involved in this at the moment. It seems they've left them out the peace talks. So it's a curious one.
Yeah, whenever you see Keir Starmer making sense, you want to double check that it's not AI, don't you? There's a whiff of a deep fake.
I'm still
about
not convinced it isn't. Yes.
Exactly. We need to have a look at that. Do you know what? Whenever you get a peace talk happening and you've got not both sides of the war, it feels like it's not a peace talk, it's teaming up against one side of the war. I don't see what's wrong with my definition there. I think I've absolutely nailed it. So Keir Starmer's right and Trump's right in a sense. We know that Trump doesn't want to be the police of the world. You just got to admit that's the truth. He's in charge over there now, and that's what's going to happen. So Europe does have to step up. It's just a reality, whether you think it's right or wrong. But I think saying that you could step up before some peace talks, it's fine. because you've got to show your arm of strength. What you shouldn't do is have people involved in the peace talks or adjacent to it say, well, surely we're going to have to, we can't recreate all the borders before 2014, and we're not going to have troops there. Are you giving up half of your potential negotiation hand before you even get in there?
Yeah, it's curious times, isn't it? Steve, we're going to take a short pause. We are going to come back. I was going to try and squeeze in the Kemi Badenoch story there for a second, but I thought we'll let it breathe for a moment. We'll also talk about Britain's most senior judge, a rare attack on Keir Starmer from the judge, lorries dumping waste, and what the hell has gone wrong over there at Doctor Who HQ. Details coming next. This is Talk.
500 million Europeans are looking for 340 million Americans to protect them from 140 million Russians who haven't been able to defeat 30 million Ukrainians in over 3 years. There is something seriously wrong. Now, there's a lot that none of us understand yet about what the objectives of Donald Trump are, but it's very, very clear that Europe now needs to stand up and pay a lot more.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Gary says, Ian, you're asking the wrong question. Not for the first time, Gary. You shouldn't be asking, can we trust Vladimir Putin? You should be asking, what other choice do we have? Do you really think that the West could do to Putin what they did to Saddam or Gaddafi? I don't think so. Putin has nuclear weapons. He's got chemical weapons, and what's more, he's got nothing to lose because he knows what awaits him if he does lose. However unpalatable it might be, the best way to deal with Putin is to treat him as an equal, like Trump is doing. Humour him by conceding some morsels like territory in Ukraine that keep him in check until he dies, when hopefully the Russian people will rise up and something better will emerge to fill the power vacuum. I'm not holding my breath, though. I think when Gary puts it like that, it seems very completely sensible to me. That makes sense. Putin's not naive, though. If he thought this was just about a bit of tacit appeasement, here's some morsels, Vlad. So it would still have to be substantial, and it could be substantial for many years, if you're giving over land, for example. What is curious is that Ukraine aren't around the table at this point, and neither is anybody from Europe. But maybe that is a tactical manoeuvre to, again, as Gary alludes, to appease Putin on this. Steve Van Allen is with us, the comedian and broadcaster. Back with more stories here, Steve, including this one. This is Kemi Badenoch. She's gone to the Alliance for Responsible Citizen conference in London. This is kind of a right-wing kind of group, people from around the world, figures, leaders, speakers, thinkers who bat from the centre-right rather than the centre-left. And Kemi Badenoch was there, and she slammed poisonous woke ideology in her speech. She criticised the ECHR over a deportation case involving foreign chicken nuggets. Let's have a little listen to what the Tory leader had to say.
The current system is being exploited. The public are enraged at the perception that the UK has become a haven for foreign criminals. One case involved a man who was allowed to stay. It was claimed that his son disliked foreign chicken nuggets. In another, a drug dealer reportedly avoids deportation because of his daughter's gender identity issues. But we were members of this convention for half a century without this madness. What's changed? It's not the values, it's the people. They are afraid of creating any kind of conflict. They use the most novel and expansive interpretations of human rights law to avoid it.
I think, Steve, she's got a whole load of problems here. This isn't really her natural language. This is her trying to nick a chapter out of the reform instruction manual, because this is their territory. It will always be said, Kemi, you were in power for all of those years. Your government were in power. You were a senior member of the last government. You did nothing on some of these issues, including ECHR, etc., which I don't think she's got any intention of leaving anyway. So it's sort of, I mean, fair play. I mean, Pete Barnes, who was in the studio with Alex before the news, he was there at that speech and said she really nailed it. I don't know whether she has the credibility to nail it.
Yeah, because that low-hanging fruit just sits there, doesn't it, waiting for someone to say, oh, yeah, this has got worse in recent years. Who is in charge? And whatever that hangs there, it's never going to be the big punch that she wants it to be. I mean, some of what she says makes a lot of sense. These stories, which maybe were happening before, the press is certainly more likely to find them now than they were, they're ridiculous. And every day the Telegraph manages to find something where someone gets to stay in the UK because of a stupid thing. I'm sure they found loads of these and they've been dripping them out one day, one story a day for a week or so. And they've been the chicken nuggets thing. And the woman who said that she was a terrorist now, she'd applied to stay in the UK 8 times, always been denied. Her 9th time, she was like, oh, I'm a member of a terrorist organisation now. And she was allowed to stay because that would have endangered her if she goes back. Of course it's ridiculous. We need to look at the system and stop these loopholes, and we'll come on to loopholes later as well with Keir Starmer, I guess, with the legal thing. But we can see that they're ridiculous. We also don't get all the stories of the people who are still sent home, even though they tried the chicken nugget defence. But every chicken nugget defence should always be stopped. Like, one's too many.
You've got to stop the chicken nugget defence. I mean, that would, if this will be referred to just that, nugget versus, the state or whatever. We are going to see much more of it, I think. Let's connect it then to this story. The Lady Chief Justice has condemned Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch for criticising a judge's decision on Gazan refugees, calling it unacceptable. This, of course, was the story of the family that used the Ukrainian scheme to be able to come to the UK. It was attacked. Starmer wasn't happy. Badenoch wasn't happy. Let's have a listen to what was said at Prime Minister's Questions on this very point just last week.
This case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain, and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well.
They presided over record high levels of immigration. Reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they thwarted her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record and her own record here.
So what this appears to be about then, Steve, not unreasonably, this is the Lady Chief Justice. She is Sue Carr, a baroness. She's criticised both Mr Starmer and Kemi Badenoch for attacking the judge's decision. It's not about the specifics, it's about politicians attacking judges. She said their public criticism is unacceptable and stressed the need of respect towards judicial independence. I don't think Sue Carr can get away with this, to be honest. I mean, yes, we don't want politicians getting involved in every court case. The judiciary is meant to be independent and not political. Simultaneously, there are going to be times when surely it is almost the duty of politicians to pick up on something that is demonstrably bonkers. And this case clearly was.
Yeah, if you don't want your judges to be criticised for things, stop your judges making such stupid decisions. Oh, what, you've applied to get into the UK using the Ukrainian scheme and you're not from Ukraine? Yeah, sure. No, if you make that decision, someone's going to criticise you. And I tell you who is allowed to have their say. The person who's in charge of the nation, who stood at the dispatch box and therefore covered by parliamentary privilege, can name people left, right and centre that we can't. It's the point of it is to be able to say things, to debate them in the House of Parliament, in the House of Commons. So the idea that, not judge stuff. No, you shouldn't be allowed to criticise judges when they do something that is, from my point of view, fairly stupid. The idea of leaving a loophole like that is ridiculous. It was like a 7-step process to it, wasn't it? They applied knowing that the scheme wasn't for them and was turned down. They appealed knowing that the appeal would be rejected because it's not for them. So they could take that appeal to a higher court and managed to get it viewed case-by-case basis and found a judge who actually said, oh, no, I think it's discriminating against you that the Ukrainian scheme doesn't apply to you even though you're not from Ukraine. What? If you do that, I'd get criticised if I came up with that as a theory,
think so.
wouldn't I?
I think so. And there's always going to be, judicial decisions that are made where it will be absolutely automatic for a politician of whatever capacity to make a comment on. And I think something like this, where there appeared to be a loophole, which was pointed out by Starmer when Badenoch asked the question, I think that's reasonable territory for a politician to intervene. I think that's not. It's not even as if Starmer's claiming he's going to personally. I'm going to ring the judge up and I'll give them a piece of my mind. It's not that. I mean, he's just simply pointing out, as she was, that that the scheme clearly wasn't designed to do what it did on this occasion.
A loophole should always be closed. I don't know why I'm misunderstanding it then. If you find a loophole, that's an error. It's a flaw in your algorithm.
Yes.
Get it closed. It doesn't feel like there's much political bias in there. It's just saying, oh, look, this scheme was not meant to do that. It did that. Let's brush up the system a bit.
The difficulty is there a loophole in trying to close the loophole? And that's when you get into a parallel kind of...
If your loophole... It's a chicken nugget loophole. This is what it's about.
It's exactly that.
If you find that the chicken nuggets... A chicken nugget loophole.
Yeah, as it will now be known. We're just embroidering on the previous discussion. Finally, Doctor Who could face the axe. Lead star apparently could be quitting. Woeful ratings, fans' fury at woke storylines. I don't know quite what's happened with Doctor Who. I'm probably not its target audience. I don't know. I'm not a massive sci-fi person. I never was a big Doctor Who fan as a kid. I kind of liked it a bit. I thought, Tom Baker was great. It had its moment. It was always meant to be a bit humorous. But there is a sense that it's gone in a really weird direction. Apparently, viewing figures attracted around about 2.25 to 3 million viewers, a significant drop on previous seasons. Doctor Who has run out of time.
Right. Very good. Because he's a Time Lord. I get it. Yeah. No, you see, when you were listing all of the attributes of a sci-fi fan, I was looking out for something to be offended by, because I am one. I love a sci-fi. I've got a R2-D2 on my keyring because my missus misunderstood because I like Star Trek and she don't know the difference. So I ended up with some Star Wars
classic blunder. Yes, yeah. So almost room for divorce.
I'm saving it. Don't you worry. They're wrong slightly about Doctor Who. The actual series had some really good episodes in it. One where he stood on that landmine, the one where racism comes up, even though the theme of racism... This guy is only 3 episodes into being black. I mean, it didn't quite have the ancestry of a proper racism story. But the specials that went before it and some of the episodes did lay it on with a trowel. There's one where, one of the David Tennant ones, the person who saves the world is is trans, and there's a line that simply... Here's what I don't like about it, right? He's using trans characters in this way. They're trans.
Yes.
Now, that's kind of what 1970s stuff did about gay people. Like, oop, look what we've got in. No, just have a character that has an attribute rather than go like, look what we're doing.
And there's always, I mean, there's no hiding it either. When the bits I've clocked or the bits I've been forced to kind of watch because of this, there is always that worthy line, you know, maybe in the future people will understand that we're all the same and we have the same values, no matter what our gender might be. Underneath it all, we're humans. You know, it's that kind of payoff of... junk.
He's not human. He's a Time Lord. He's got two hearts. And there's a bit as well where that character says, a Time Lord that presents as a man could never understand. He was a woman 2 episodes ago. It was just since they'd had the Jodie Whittaker ones. If ever there's someone who can understand what it's like to mess with the concept of gender, it's the one who used to be a woman from Sheffield about half an hour ago.
Absolutely. If you look back at it, what they've been through, you know, it's... I mean, the original Doctor Who, when I've seen clips of it, the guy looks about 150. You know, I had no trouble in believing that he used to be alive 100 years, because he looked as if he had. Patrick Troughton, was it? Was he the original fella? Back in the day before
William Hartnell is your first
William Hartnell, that's your man. That's who I was thinking of. Listen, Steve, thank you. Great to have you on as ever. Steve and Alan, the comedian and the broadcaster. Pick up on any of that. We're open for your calls and comments. We're asking about Ukraine and our position as the United Kingdom. Do we have a responsibility if there is a peacekeeping element that needs to be done? Do you just go off and leave the place unattended when you've got bad Vlad, the invader, sitting in the wings, ready and waiting, looking for what his next move might be, regardless of what's been agreed with the United States? What do we do here? So can we ever trust Putin, I suppose, is part of the question. 0344 499 1000. What is wrong with sending British troops, along with other countries doing the same thing? Why would you not support that? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your site.
John in Wallington says it's not about whether we can trust Putin, it's about how much we can persuade him to work with us. It would be better for the West to have improved relations with Russia when we have to confront Chinese expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. True, despite the fact that they are allied to Russia and fearful of China's growing military might, says John in Wallington. Again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, who doesn't want a world where ideally we can all rub along reasonably well, even if we completely and fundamentally disagree with, I don't know, the political system or infrastructure in different countries. The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin is willing to negotiate with Ukrainian President Zelensky as Russian and American officials meet alone for peace talks. There ain't no Ukrainian around that table in Saudi Arabia, no European nation either. Zelensky said his country won't accept a peace deal negotiated on its behalf. Meanwhile, Germany rejected Keir Starmer's calls for British and European peacekeeping troops on the ground, while Russia warned against any escalatory steps. In a moment, Colonel James Sunderland, former veteran and Tory MP. First, Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme. Keir, good afternoon to you.
Hello there, good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, the overview of this, in terms, firstly, of these negotiations taking place and sitting around the table with the American Secretary of State, obviously the Russians are there too, but no Ukrainians in sight. I mean, one would like to assume there is some method in this rather subtlest move.
Well, the Russians certainly have a method, and they seem to have come out of it with exactly what they wanted, because they had a plan. And let's not forget that the Russian and the American sides went into these negotiations in Riyadh with very different stated objectives. And unsurprisingly, that means the Russians have come away with achieving what they actually wanted in the first place. The Russians wanted a rehabilitation of themselves. They wanted to be invited back to the table, to be equal partners with the United States. They wanted what Donald Trump had promised them in that phone call last week, being brought back as an equal partner. And that seems to have been what the United States has handed them, at least if we believe the first readouts from these talks, on top of all the concessions about Ukraine that we heard about last week. So effectively, they both seem to be on the same page. And this is more about arriving at a consensus between the United States and Russia, which can then be forced on Ukraine and Europe.
Could it be as simple and as crude or as blunt as Trump looking at this, going, right, it's the Russians we need. I'll deal with Ukraine. Don't you worry about them. I'll deal with them. I'll sort them out. Zelensky will be malleable when he needs to be. I'll make that bit work. It's Vladimir Putin and Russia that we really need to get some traction and movement going. Could it be as simple and as blunt as that?
It's probably just as simple and blunt as that, but in the opposite direction. It's not traction that they're looking for with the Russians. It's how they can actually arrive at some kind of understanding with Russia to bring about this peace, so-called peace, that Donald Trump has promised, regardless of the long-term consequences. And as we've seen Donald Trump say, it doesn't really matter to him whether Ukraine is run by Russia one day or not. So all of this talk about the concessions that he's trying to extract from Ukraine in terms of a long-term mortgage on all of their mineral wealth, he'll be just as happy to extract that from Russia after Russia has been allowed to overrun Ukraine.
And in terms of the Brits and other European countries being there in some kind of overlapping peacekeeping capacity, which wouldn't be unusual. It's a role we play in many countries and have done forever around the world, and often almost anonymously, various troops stationed across the globe. This has been referred to as escalatory steps from Russia. The Germans, Mr. Scholz, he discombobulated at the mere idea, said it was rather premature. What's your take on that, Keir?
Well, we shouldn't pay too much attention to either what Russia says or what Germany says in this respect, because Russians will always say that anything is an escalatory step because they know that's a trigger word that gets people terribly excited. It works along with Russia's nuclear intimidation. It's made everybody terrified of the E word. And of course, Scholz runs and panics at any possible mention of any kind of assertive step to try to address the situation.
And of course, he won't be there in half an hour's time either, so there is that.
Absolutely. It no longer matters to him. You wonder why he's still being so timorous about everything when it's not actually going to be his problem anymore.
Yeah.
But it leaves behind those that might actually be willing to step in and look for some of those long-term security guarantees that Europe needs in Ukraine in order to stop Russia there rather than them rolling on forwards. It's really dangerous to call these peacekeeping force, because that gives the impression of lightly armored people in blue helmets, whereas in fact what you need is a heavy force that's capable of defending itself against Russia, because that is what it is going to have to do.
Yeah. On that point, Keir, great to have you with us. Thank you. Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme. Let's get a word from James Sunderland, former colonel in the British Army and, of course, former Conservative MP. James, good afternoon to you.
Ian, hello.
Nice to have you with us as ever. It is the question I suppose everybody is asking, have the Americans played a blinder here? Is this incredible strategic manoeuvring from Mr. Trump and his operational bodies on the ground, Mr. Rubio in particular, or is this a catastrophic error that's going to send Europe into turmoil?
I think it's both, Ian. I think the Americans have played a blinder. Trump wants the war to end quite clearly. It's costing the American taxpayer a fortune. Trump has a view that Europe must step up to the plate in terms of its own European security. But also what's interesting here is we don't know what Trump seeks to get out of the negotiations in Saudi Arabia. He may have a trump card. It might be that Putin is more desperate than we know. I suspect that the Russian economy is really, really squealing right now. And we need to understand what the outcome is of the peace talks before we can think about UK policy.
Yeah. What's your take on peace talks happening without 50% of the interested parties being in attendance, i.e. Ukraine?
Well, it certainly suits Russia, the fact that Europe is not at the table and that Ukraine's not at the table. But, I think Starmer, to be fair, is playing it pretty well at the moment. We've had the European summit on Monday yesterday. It's very important, I think, that the European nations have an idea of what they would do with every eventuality. So quite clearly, Russia loves the idea of being back at the table. Russia sees the world being divided up into three key power blocks, China, the US and Russia. It plays to the narrative. But ultimately, this is about European security, and therefore European nations must have a say in what the future looks like.
And as I mentioned to our previous guest, James, is this a case of Mr. Trump simply going, like, it's the Russians, we really need to carve out some kind of settled arrangement where possible? Don't worry about Mr. Zelensky. I'll sort him out. I'll make that work. Is it kind of that sort of pecking order approach to this that you think the Americans are taking?
Well, it's interesting because Trump did say yesterday that he wasn't averse in principle to the idea of putting US troops on the ground in Ukraine. So again, we're not quite sure what the negotiations are currently talking about, but quite clearly Putin cannot be and must not be rewarded for invading Ukraine. It can't be the case that Russia falls back on its existing territory. And Article 5 here is very important because Ukraine cannot go forward now without a guarantee of its security, which is why I suspect that there has to be a US backstop to security arrangements in Ukraine. I'm not averse to peacekeeping troops on the ground, but that needs to be as part of a coalition effort. Starmer's been quite bold. He said that let's go and do this, noting, of course, that British troops have been there training the Ukrainians since 2014. There are many moving parts here with no obvious way out for the time being.
Yeah. Last week, the Americans made the point that, look, if you think Ukraine's going to look like it used to look in terms of borders, think again. Zelensky must already know that he's going to have to concede somewhere here. And there's some obvious regions within Ukraine where that will happen. But happen it will.
Well, the eastern part of Ukraine is under Russian occupation now. Crimea fell to the Russians in 2014, so the Russians have already made territorial gains that they won't want to give up. But ultimately, whatever deal is agreed upon, it will split the Ukrainian parliament. Zelensky will not be able to keep all of his people happy. Ukraine's paid a very, very high price in terms of blood spilt, and the country needs to be rebuilt. So in many ways, and this is the sort of the appeasement option, in many ways, the existing border now could be the right way to go in terms of avoiding further loss of life. But quite clearly, that's no guarantee of future security, and it clearly rewards Russia, which is the wrong thing to do. So there are lots at stake here, and we need to work out what the outcomes are from Riyadh until we, as a country, UK, can decide on next steps.
Do you imagine, just a final point, James, you're a military man, it's in your blood. I mentioned peacekeeping is something that we've done all over the world. Half the time we don't even hear about those stories. Not that they're secret, they just happen in the background. British troops and others who are in attendance at various places post a war zone or for some other reason. We do it rather well. We've got a great experience in it. It would stand to reason, wouldn't it, given how precarious this all is and how delicate this agreement is always going to be, no matter if they do all agree to it, it's still going to be fragile. Having a peacekeeping force there, I would have thought would be fairly standard, wouldn't it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I served on 6 deployments myself. I served through the Afghanistan and Iraq years. And of course, no British Prime Minister wants to deploy British troops in a war that can't be won. And I think ultimately, if there is a decision to put peacekeeping troops on the ground in Ukraine, it should be under a UN mandate. It should be part of a much, much broader coalition effort with the US at its heart. I think that anything less than that means it won't be tenable. But ultimately, if the intent is to keep the peace, I think we can do that. But keeping the peace with Russians having occupied the eastern part of Ukraine could itself be no firm basis on which to deploy troops.
Interesting. James, thank you as ever for your time. Really appreciate that. He is Colonel James Sunderland, former veteran and former Conservative MP. Over to you on this one. Can the West ever trust Putin? Putin is about expansion, right? That's the whole point, as was said just a moment ago, that Russia see the world divided up between 3 superpowers, China, the United States and them. Russia is not a superpower in the conventional sense. They've got some horrendous military plant and equipment that they could let off at any time, and that wouldn't end rather well. In economic terms, this is not a powerhouse. It's not the USSR. That's clearly the direction of travel in which Mr. Putin would like to go. In order for that to happen, then he might have to start sniffing around other countries and regions. So how could we ever seriously trust Vladimir Putin? Or is trust not really the word we're looking for? Is it work with in some capacity? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
It's very telling that we seem to care more about the human rights of people coming to this country illegally than we do about the people who have built this country with their own, just incredible skills. It's staggering to me that we have in the United Kingdom people choosing between heating and eating. That is the UK in 2025. I do not understand how people are not out on the streets over this. It's just incredible to me.
So apparently this is going to be saving the UK government about $1 billion or something.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is talk.
This one from Simon, who's in Reading, who says, reference to USA intentions, Trump has told everyone what he is driving towards. Number one, sort out the current wars to bring peace. Number two, agree a unilateral 50% reduction of nuclear with China and Russia. Something he can't get done in one is sorted. Until one is sorted. I get it, Simon. Thank you for that. Anthony says peace can only be guaranteed with the backing of American forces. What will decide Ukrainians' future will be when America says we're not sending Ukraine any more aid. Will the UK have the funds to back Ukraine without America? David is in Exeter. David.
Hi, Ian. So it's really good stuff you were discussing there with James Cartledge.
Yeah.
What I want to do is just highlight really what the Vice President and Secretary of Defence US have been trying to get across to European nations on military policy. The key thing they said was that we needed to be ready to fight. Right? If those talks fail, obviously we need to be ready to fight. That's academic. Now, where our own national military is concerned, we currently have and have had for quite some time an ammunition crisis. So in order for our military to do anything, step one needs to be the procurement problems, which have been there for quite some time. And you have James Cartledge, I think, very recently on your station was
James Sunderland.
Well, you had James Cartledge on a couple of days ago and then James Sutherland on just now. But
I see. Okay.
The Shadow Defence Secretary was talking really in terms of there was a critical problem with ammunition procurement and production and restocking our arsenal. So that's step one. That's got to be fixed. Nobody's doing anything without that or being credible or, as Pete Hesketh is saying, you know, we need a dose of reality. Well, that's reality number one. Now, secondly, of course, is that the political leaders have got to tell our country the truth. And that's something Vance was highlighting. And that is that we are at war. Europe is at war with Russia. Everything currently other than the shooting, well, the shooting's going on in the Ukraine. So we need to wake up. The biggest problem we've got is for many decades now, since Blair really, you could even go back further if you wanted, our military and the MOD has been gutted, literally gutted. The MOD has been gutted. It no longer functions as a HQ. It couldn't run a war if it wanted to. And the military has been set as a deterrent force. Now, it isn't deterring anybody without ammunition. Now, if we've got American military officers highlighting this openly, believe you me, the adversaries know all about this problem. This is not a secret. So in order for anybody to do anything, and this is directed at Starmer and Jonathan Powell, the National Security Council, and Pat McFadden in the National Security Council, what they've got to do is rapidly procure appropriate kit quickly. And the only way that's going to happen, guess what, is to buy off-the-shelf American. Because BAE and Rolls-Royce and Babcock will take years to sort this stuff out, and it isn't going to be time appropriate. So I think people really need to understand that at the moment, our adversaries are doing everything to us in the UK other than actually shooting at us. And let's bear in mind, we have currently no real actual effective air defence against what our adversaries could put towards us. Now, I know that for a fact because I've sat behind numerous military chiefs in Defence Committee who told our MPs over and over again that the government hasn't listened. So Starmer now is in a dreadful position because he's a wartime PM. Now, this is something I'm reliably informed Rishi Sunak did not want to be, and that's why he decided to call the election. He did not want to be a wartime PM. So Starmer is going to be a wartime PM, whether he likes it or not, or whether he's ready, willing, or able.
Yeah.
And understanding how badly our military is set at the moment and the procurement and all the rest of it, we're in a very, very dangerous and vulnerable position. And it's fair enough for Hesketh and Vance to just be calling us out on this, but this is a Labour and a Tory problem. And to fix it, they're going to have to get their fingers out quickly.
And it can't be done autonomously, right? That would require the collective might of the European continent. Is that what you're saying?
Well, was always the gambit. It's been that gambit for quite some time. You know, the peace dividend was based on if we added up all the military capability in Europe, it would outweigh any Soviet or Russian capability, and we would do it that way. Now, the problem is, of course, without that effective unified ability to apply it, which would currently be the Americans, I know the EU are trying to do it, and they aspire to do it through their defence union. But that will take the EU years. Now, what you're then saying is, well, we're going to give the adversaries years to arm up. I don't think that's going to be a runner.
Yeah.
So this is our big problem, and this really I could paper my living room walls with articles from senior military officers over the decades who've called out successive governments about reducing capability, because reducing the military capability on the one hand also cut our industry on the other. And cutting the industry is now the problem. We can't rearm quick enough because the industry isn't there to do it.
So how do we get it there? What's the workaround on this?
The only way they're going to do this, there might be some legs in the reciprocal training arrangements with the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that's something I've suggested into the ether, you know, before John Healey became Secretary of Defence, was that, you know, we're training them. Actually, it's more that they need to train us because they're the ones that are doing it. You know, what actually works because of the adaptation rates out in the field. So that's a runner. But ultimately, you know, if there's going to have to be a show of force, and we need to rearm quickly, how does that work? Starmer will be having to spend a fortune with Trump.
There it is. Listen, David, thank you. David in Exeter, very thorough stuff on this one. How can we ever trust Putin and his position? Dan in Kent says, what a load of rubbish, Ian. Russia is the biggest country in the world with the capability of blowing it up. If that's not a superpower, I don't know what is. Well, if you won't want to judge superpowers solely on the size of the country, then yes, Russia is absolutely that in terms of its military might. It has a larger military personnel than the United States, not in terms of other areas, supremacy in the air and things like that. But of course it's big, but that's not the only defining criteria for being a superpower. Economically, you've got to also punch at a certain level too. I mean, I certainly take Dan's point. You wouldn't want a row on a Friday afternoon with Russia. I do get that. But there are other factors at play here as well. And its economy is around about the size of California, which again is also not the only criteria, but it's certainly an important one. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Loads of response on this. British troops on the ground. Is that something you could countenance? Does it make sense along with others? And how can the West ever trust Putin? What sort of guarantees can they get from the Russian leader for us to feel safe going forward? All coming up on the other side of the news.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's a busy hour on the way, everybody. Welcome to the home of common sense. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Russia says the first round of talks with the US aimed at negotiating peace in Ukraine went very well, but the Kremlin has warned the UK against putting troops on the ground, saying the move would be escalatory. But how do we ever get to a point where we can trust Putin? And would you support the idea of British troops being there in a peacekeeping capacity? We'll have more comment on that shortly. Also this afternoon, migrant hotels look set to be used for 4 more years until at least 2029 as Labour pushes back the deadline again to close them down. They've got no further, basically, and they're out of ideas. We'll talk about that shortly, too. And attempts to look tough on crime by successive governments have left Britain's prisons on the brink of collapse, according to a damning new report. That's the old conundrum that we face every time we discuss this. Who should go to jail and who shouldn't? And is there another way, an alternative to pokey? More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Barry says, afternoon, Ian. Britain has done its bit in Europe. The countless war cemeteries testify to that. Time for the Europeans to step up. Indeed, although that is still us, of course, not EU Ians, but Europeans. Thomas says the version of Britain and Europe we have today is not worth fighting for, and it looks like it never will be. There is definitely a sense, isn't there, when you look at the EU, and you can base this on, the J.D. Vance story, which, if only J.D. had done a little bit of homework on some of the factual stuff, it might have been a bit more authentic. But his overarching speech, this rousing speech he gave to the EU at that security conference in Munich, was seen as an absolute game changer. What it did do, it did shine a big old light onto some of the shortcomings of the EU, of which there are flipping many, frankly, regardless of whether you're a Remainer or a Brexiteer. I think it's in a very fragile place. Look at what's about to happen in Germany. Look at what has almost happened in France. Look where Italy are, for example. You've got some lone characters like Spain and a couple of others who are in different positions, but to say it's not game-changing and we're not experiencing a real shift over there on continental Europe would be foolish, because it absolutely is. Let's get a word on this and the other big political stories of the day. Alicia Fitzgerald, political correspondent regularly of this parish, is back with us. Alicia, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. All kicking off over there in Saudi, right? Nice big peace conference. One problem, they forgot to invite 50% of the people involved in the peace, namely the Ukraine. And of course, that's upset the Ukrainians. The Americans are kind of, don't worry, we know what we're doing here. They are going to be part of this, but an interesting start nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to have a peace conversation about enforcing peace or reaching a peace deal for a certain country and not have any representative from that particular country just seems absolutely ludicrous to everyone involved. And I totally understand why people from Ukraine would be really, A, annoyed by this, and B, just slightly lose trust in the other nations who are trying to help, because clearly at the centre of this conversation must be Ukraine. Ultimately, anything that happens must be put to Ukraine and must be agreed by Ukraine and its people. So not the best start. I think that's definitely a fair assessment.
Yeah, I mean, some would say, look, this has gone on for so long. Lives have been lost in ludicrous numbers. A country has been, decimated and can hardly begin to put itself back together. If it takes unconventional moves, if it goes against, the grain here and there, then so be it. Let that all happen. It's got to be whatever way it can be to get success. And, look, we are dealing with Putin here, so maybe the Americans are, playing a longer game. We'll bolster Putin a little bit. We'll make him feel like the more important partner in this conundrum, and that might be the best starting point. Could it be something as simple as that?
I mean, it may well be, but even if that is the strategy, you have to think about how that looks and how that comes across to the other nations, including Ukraine and all of its allies. I think this idea of potentially cozying up to Putin, whether successful or not, is a fine strategy from Donald Trump if he thinks that's what's going to work and if everyone else thinks that's what's going to work. But you also have to make sure that by doing that, you're not kind of usurping Ukraine or making it feel like everything is going through Russia. And not Ukraine, who obviously is the country here that's really suffering. So I do think that even if that is the strategy in this particular instance, if you're having peace talks, if you're talking about finding a solution to the conflict and you're not having the victim of the conflict at the heart of the conversation, I just don't think that looks particularly great.
Yeah. Fair point. Of course, this is going to take a long time anyway. This is, very early doors, but it's the start of something that, in fairness to everybody, hadn't happened before. So, Mr. Trump didn't quite sort this in a day, but within a very swift period of time, something is up and running. So, we hope that whatever comes of this, however long it takes, it is positive for all concerned. Interesting couple of stories reference migration and immigration, Alicia. This one's interesting. We seem to be getting a story a day at the moment of people who are allowed to stay in the UK for really interesting reasons. We had the chicken nugget ruling, as it will be known in legal circles for hundreds of years to come, when the family were allowed to stay because the kid didn't much like the nuggets over there in what is Albania. Was the Albanian nuggets? But did you know, by the way, Alicia? I know you love a McDonald's, but did you know that there are no McDonald's in Albania?
Actually, I did not know that. No.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned it to us, and we thought, that can't be true. There's McDonald's almost on the end of every street, for goodness sake. Albania is sans McDonald's. It ain't got no golden arches.
Well, maybe that's the reason that people want to leave.
It could be. Well, it could be that. It might be enough. If there was no KFCs, I'd be out of there like a shot. So, I can understand lines being drawn on culinary basis. But this story is perhaps more disturbing. A Slovakian man who was jailed for hitting a woman with a shovel, a very violent attack, was not deported, could have been deported. The Home Office tried to deport him, but the tribunal blocked it, saying that his rehabilitation looks pretty successful, so nothing to see here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's you've got the government and the Home Office trying to deport him, and then the laws that the government created effectively stopping that deportation, and then the government can come forward and say, oh, it wasn't us, we tried, it was the High Court. But actually, they are the policymakers, and also if anyone can change the laws, it is the government and it is these politicians. So it's a slightly interesting, messy situation. The whole idea of this as well is that it was hard to deport this particular criminal because he had been rehabilitated. And I think even if you are really in favour of rehabilitation, actually I am in lots of cases, not all, but lots of cases, I think that's the best way forward if possible. I think at a time when migration is seen as one of the most important issues for people, this is just not the best look. And I think the other interesting thing to note is that these offences that he had committed were before we left the EU, and therefore we had various different rules about returning migrants and returns deals. So he's slightly protected by old laws that we're now no longer part of as well. So it's all really messy and difficult. But ultimately, the only people that can change that are the government. So yeah.
Well, indeed. Almost you can see, I say this a lot, you can see why Trump won, why that, look, we're just going to bring common sense back to it. You hit somebody with a shovel, you're not from this country, you've got to go. It's as simple as that. Whereas over here, and not just it, but other Western countries have this protracted, labyrinthine world of laws and appeals and judges and solicitors that get involved and hearings and, you get overturned at one point, you appeal it, then it's overturned in your favour and then they appeal it and it goes back and forth. Could be a dozen times and then eventually some decision is made. And the sort of Trump position, which has understandably a lot of support, is no, if it sounds like a duck, we all know what the deal is here. This is a violent person. They've got to go. And that's what Trump's attempting to do. It's something we struggle with a bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that in the sense of there are often so many different people that a law or a situation or a decision has to be run past in the UK. There's so many different people. A case gets thrown from this person to this person, and this person has to decide. And in that process, clearly, so many people's opinions can actually massively water down the decision or change the decision or get in the way of what the initial outcome was supposed to be. So definitely, in terms of stories like this, I think lots of people would agree, even if you don't actually agree with the kind of more traditional right-wing immigration rules, that having someone who is violent in the country, who has been violent to someone and in such a grotesque way is, it's not ideal, and it's not a particularly positive thing for anyone.
I was about to say, we kind of need a minister for common sense. Didn't we have something like, was Esther McVey something like that?
Yeah, it was Esther McVey, but I can't really think of anything that she did.
I don't really remember. I mean, maybe she had a big list and she had it all, neatly penned in her file of facts, ready for action. But I don't think her brief extended to areas such as this. I think it was more about, whether you need to put a big sign saying this tap might be hot if you turn on the red one. Whether it was stuff like that, or whether it was as profound as these kind of rulings. I should also add, by the way, on the immigration story, that the Home Office has decided that Labour's goal to end the hotels being used by migrants, close it within 12 months, been delayed because of the backlog. It's now going to be 2029 before they are saying they will close these hotels. There's like 400 of these hotels and growing around the UK. It's costing an absolute ton of money, millions on a daily basis. And what the Tories couldn't solve, it seems, the Labour government can't solve either.
Well, yeah, this is really interesting. It's all basically boils down to that massive backlog of asylum claims that haven't been processed yet. And we have been hearing about this, I think, for at least 2 years, as in a very much the kind of forefront of the news agenda. Everyone's talking about it because this is a growing list of people who've arrived here illegally through not a safe and legal route, but have tried to claim asylum and claim that they are a refugee. Those claims are basically just these huge documents that take a big team of people to sift through and to work out whether or not this person can be granted asylum or whether or not they've actually come from a country that is considered totally safe. That seems to just be taking so much time. And I don't know whether it's a case of them not having enough people to go through them, whether it's a case of it's just a super inefficient system, which I think is probably more likely of the two.
Yep.
Until all these claims are resolved, there's nowhere for these migrants to go, because you can't legally just send them back until you have evidence that they are allowed to be sent back, but you can't let them stay here legally if they don't have asylum. So they're basically just in massive limbo.
Someone else who maybe shouldn't be where they are is the Chancellor, and that's Rachel Reeves, because they've uncovered yet another little howler in her backstory, Alicia. This is her entry in Who's Who, where she falsely claimed to have contributed to a very prestigious journal called the Journal of Political Economy. This is, of course, the authoritative guide on notable individuals. But apparently she didn't contribute to that at all. She contributed to something much different and a little more lowbrow in the grander scale, and therefore, well, she's been rumbled again. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, her CV is definitely under a lot of scrutiny at the moment. And look, in some ways, I do think that this is the kind of thing that too much time can be spent on, too much focus can be given to, purely because in this particular instance, yes, this journal that she's alleged to have contributed to is more prestigious than the actual one. Does that really impact how good she is at her day-to-day job? Probably not, is the answer to that. However, what it does show is a lack of transparency, or potentially just a lack of, even if it is just an innocent mistake, it's the kind of mistake that you'd hope someone in such a senior position had probably cleared up or made sure hadn't got to this point before it was discovered, at very least.
Yeah. I mean, there is you're right. I mean, ordinarily, people can make an error, and even if people are a little bit hyperbolic on a CV, lots of people have done it. But when you're going to be the Chancellor, and when some of those entries on your CV or LinkedIn page have been reasonably significant for somebody who goes on to such high office, too many of these could cause Keir Starmer a problem.
Yeah, and I think also the important thing to remember is that maybe, 15, 20 years ago, before we had such access to every single bit of information about everyone's past and everyone's lives, this probably would have been really easy to get away with. You probably could have massively inflated your CV in a way that you just can't do now because everything's online, everything's easy to access. I mean, I'm sure I could really easily find your CV in if I really wanted to and pick through the whole thing. And that's just the way it is these days. So I think you kind of have to realize that now it is slightly higher stakes if you're going to kind of say something that's slightly inaccurate.
Okay. I mean, you know your way around Westminster. I'm going to give you a little test here, Alicia. This is the Rachel Reeves challenge, okay? So I've uncovered a couple of facts about her CV. You've got to tell me whether they are true or false. This is Rachel Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Number one, Rachel Reeves assisted in carrying out the world's first heart transplant.
False.
Correct, that is false. But, it was... Could have been. Before Judy Garland was given the role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, it was actually offered to Rachel Reeves.
I can see that for her in a weird way. I think maybe in another life that could have been a good part.
Yeah, it would make her about 120 as well, wouldn't it? We should add, but there we go. You got 2 out of 2 there, Alicia. Your credentials as a top-notch political eye and journalist are resealed yet again. Brilliant. Thank you for your time, as ever. That's Alicia Fitzgerald, political commentator on the programme. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Kenny in Edinburgh says, Ian, Kemi Badenoch must think British people button up at the back. I love that phrase. Or as my old father-in-law, also from Edinburgh, would have said, came down the Clyde on a water biscuit. She was in government and did nothing. The words she said are right, but she has lost the right to say them because of her actions, or lack of, when she was in government, telling a far more accurate picture of what she believes in. Of course, the answer to that is, or the defence that they give, and thank you, Kenny, for that, they always give is, but when you're in government, you're kind of bound by this thing called collective responsibility, which means that individually as a minister, you might have a different view to the one agreed by the majority of your cabinet colleagues, but because of this thing called collective responsibility, you have to go out to the TV studios and programmes like this and sell the policy and sell it with passion, as if you also endorse it. So she might say that, look, I was working with Rishi, we had a very different set of, it wasn't that it wasn't something we believed in, but we had more pressing matters. I don't know. But I think Kenny is right. She's kind of lost the right to say it, because she's associated with a government that did nothing about this stuff, absolutely nothing. And most of those stories that we've talked about, and when we talk about the word woke, and I know, yes, I say it all the time, not my favourite word because I don't think it describes what's going on here. It sort of throws away really important elements of free speech and the right to speak and opine and have views on things. And the word woke sort of dismantles that really as if it's just a bunch of old gammons having a moan, when we are talking about really serious threats to free speech. And if you look at all those people that were arrested or nabbed or got a knock at the door from the old Bill, most of those stories we've discussed all happened under the Conservatives. The non-crime, hate crime thing, all of that under the Conservatives started and grew under the Tories. So they are not really in a position to give any lessons on this. I think most people would agree. We're going to go back to your comments, whether it's on Putin or any of this other stuff as well. Lines are open, 0344 499 1000.
I think it's very telling that we seem to care more about the human rights of people coming to this country illegally than we do about the people who have built this country with their own, just incredible skills. It's staggering to me that we have in the United Kingdom people choosing between heating and eating. That is the UK in 2025. I do not understand how people are not out on the streets over this. It's just incredible to me.
So apparently this is going to be saving the UK government about $1 billion or something.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Thomas says, given the fact that NATO encouraged Ukraine to break a number of peace agreements, the question should be, will Putin trust NATO? Remember Angela Merkel's admission that they only signed the Minsk agreements to buy time, which really rather highlights the complexity of this picture. This one comes in from an ex-soldier. Ian Collins, you're being incredibly naive and stupid if you think it's totally Ukraine good and Russia bad. Have you bothered to go out to that region of the world and see for yourself what the real situation is like? Or are you still just an ill-informed armchair critic, says an ex-soldier? Well, I think we can all agree that whatever way you want to slice it, nobody should be taking any lectures from Vladimir Putin, a murderous dictator of the worst kind. That doesn't mean that everybody else in other countries are all squeaky clean and lovely. And he did invade a sovereign country, and that country happens to be on European territory. We are part of Europe. Yes, we do have skin in the game for that reason, if no other. And of course, for the very specific security considerations as to where Russia go next. You know, this is a man that wants to rebuild the USSR. In his ideal dream, he wakes up with ideas of being that leader. At the moment, it's looking a little iffy for him, but I don't sense he's going to stop. Let's go to Stuart in Bradford on this point. Stuart, what have you got for us?
Well, if I remember rightly, when it all kicked off, you had Prigozhin, I think that was his name, who was leader of the army for Russia, who was, at that time, said, oh, he's only got a load of criminals and heathens that are fighting for, against Ukraine.
Yeah.
So he smashed Ukraine on his own. Now then, when it all started, Ukraine had over 250,000 soldiers. It was the second biggest army in Europe. The only one that beat it was Turkey, with 350,000. How many thousands of men have we trained up since then? And they've all gone. Whatever armaments we've had, the Chieftain tanks, the Abrams tanks, the Scud missiles, everything we've sent, the Russians have dealt with them. What are we going to go and fight with that we haven't given?
So we're in so the UK is in a fairly impotent position, is your point. What about the collective military might of other countries on our doorstep? France.
What have we got left? We've given everything we had. There's no armament shells. The only thing that they've never had that we haven't given is planes. But Russia has got the biggest air defence system and the best in the world. The planes are not going to do any different.
Sorry, who did you say has got the best planes?
Russia has got the best air defence system in the world.
Have they got a better air defence system than the Americans?
Well, who's going to attack the Americans? We're on about Russia and now in Europe.
OK, all right, no, OK. In that context, I hear what you're saying. Go on.
Right, so the planes aren't going to help Europe having a go at Russia. Russia has got hypersonic missiles.
They have.
They can land in Berlin within 12 minutes from the heart and of Russia. We've got nothing to fire back as quick.
And do you sense that this is Putin's kind of main card, that he can always play? That there is no... If he's got the Americans on side, the Europeans aren't going to do anything because they haven't got the stuff to do it with.
Well, the Americans have not got anything left anyway because they keep saying Biden kept giving them everything he got and now they've got nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if you added up all of America's military might and all of Europe's military might, you wouldn't want to be on the business end of a bullet.
Yeah, but at the other end of that, then add China on to Russia, and then what have you got?
Yeah, it's a good point. It keeps expanding. Great call. Stuart, thank you for that. Some interesting food for thought there. Paul is in Newport on this same question. Paul, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi, Ian. Good to speak to you, my friend.
You too.
You say, should we trust Putin? Of course we shouldn't. But equally so, I put this to you. Would you really trust the EU? Bear in mind, in my opinion, I run a small business here. We've spoken before, OK, that does import and export. So I sell into Europe and I buy in from Europe. Mm-hmm. When we left Europe, the EU absolutely kicked our teeth in. They literally tried to crush the economy of the UK, single-handed. They just wanted to put us to the boot, OK? All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but now they find themselves where, is it something like 16 of the EU countries border Russia? It's a big number, isn't it? It's quite a considerable number.
Yeah, when you start looking, even very small bordering points, but yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, because it's so big, they've got so many fights. None of those, to the best of my understanding, is the UK. We don't border Russia. So all of a sudden, we've got all the EU people going, oh, come on over, Mr. Starmer, let's be your buddy, let's be your buddy. They showed their true colours when we chose Brexit. The problem is, of course, is that you then say, well, how much faith have I got in our politicians and our minister? Bugger all. So if ever there was a time for us to say, actually, we want to reset, our friendship, if you like, on our negotiations with the EU. Well, I tell you what, put the two together. You should be saying, or Starmer should be saying, and ministers should be saying, you want us to help you out with that bully boy over there, it's going to cost you. And you're going to start trading with us. Bear in mind, as it stands now, if you want to export a jam donut, it'll take you 3 vets' signatures for a jam donut. Now, chocolate buns from Belgium, they come over by the truckload because our half-wits don't do anything. We don't impose the laws on them that they impose on us. We're too dumb to do that.
Yeah.
But if you said to me now, is this an opportunity for the ministers and all those involved, the blob as you call them, to say, actually, we could kill 2 birds with one stone here. We'll get in and we'll do the right thing and we'll help out where best we can. But part of the return is we ain't sending no vets to sign off a jam donut. Because that's lunacy. But that's what they did. Clearly, I mean, I do it all the time, but to get stuff in and out of Europe is a nightmare because they've just thrown so much paperwork at it. So
they love a bit of paperwork, don't they? I mean,
yeah, but we don't do it, do they? The problem, the UK, the biggest problem, and I'm a lot older than you, Ian, sadly. The UK, we've always played everything by the book, haven't we? We follow every rule there is. No one else does. Everyone else just sort of says, yeah, whatever, signs it over, and off it goes, There was a famous piece where we were trying to, this might be just conspiracy theory, I don't know, you read so much of these things. We were trying to export motor vehicles into Germany. I think it was Land Rover, actually, Range Rover Sports. And they said, is this completely made in the UK? Yeah, Longbridge, whatever it is. And they said, well, what about the spark plugs? Knowing that they come from Japan.
Right.
And so they said, and it was like, spark plugs? Who gives a toss about spark plugs? There have all these bits in there. And they said, but the Germans, I mean, we're bringing in Audis and BMWs and everything.
Yeah.
But your spark plugs.
They got you on the old spark plug clause. Nothing worse. Listen, Paul, I've got to jump in just because of time, but I think that the analogy you're making there about the bureaucratic nature of Europe should not be understated, and particularly in this context when we're talking about the security. Europe is feeling like very much a failing bloc at the moment in terms of the politics of it, this sort of kind of one-size, Blairy, Merkel-y, Macron-y, even Rishi type collective of groupthink, it's being smashed to smithereens. And I know there's difficulties with that because you end up swinging from multiple hymn sheets. But man alive, I mean, if you look at some of the nonsense and the bureaucracy and the way, that fella at the security conference bawling his eyes out after J.D. Vance said, I think this place is a flipping funhouse. It's a laughing stock. And he's crying. He's not crying over some terror attack at a German market or any of that stuff or the horrendous things we've seen over. He's not crying at that. He's crying because J.D. Vance called him some bad words. How dare he? It was just like he'd fallen apart at the seams, this character. And I think that was a great, almost a metaphor for the very continent that he's currently representing, Europe. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk prisons in a moment as well. Tough talk by ministers have left prisons on the brink. Is that true or false? We'll talk to one man who might be able to help us out on this. His name is Johnny Gilbert, prison reform advocate. He's got his own backstory in this area as well. We'll talk to him next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. It's 25 to 3 on Talk. Now, a report suggests attempts to look tough on crime by successive governments have left Britain's prisons on the brink of collapse. The Independent Sentencing Review says despite an overall fall in crime since the 1990s, the prison population has been rising, leading to an overwhelming and ineffective system. The government is considering tougher sentences outside of prison, with its reform plans expected to be announced later this year. Let's speak with Johnny Gilbert, prison reform advocate. He's seen the inside of a cell himself, knows what he's talking about. Johnny, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Nice.
Ian, thank you for having me back again.
Not at all. No, it's a pleasure to have you on. Look, I think we've talked before on this, the people that shouldn't be in jail that end up in jail, and everyone will perhaps have a different list as to who they think fits that criteria. I think most of us agree that violent, horrendous murderers, rapists, and those with proclivities to continue offending probably should be in jail. In fact, definitely should be in jail. But is the overcrowding based on this very simple analysis in this report that says this is all about ministers going, I'm going to be tough on crime, so everyone's going to jail?
Well, Ian, that's what the data's suggesting, because it's saying since the 1990s, crime has actually fallen. but at the same time, the incarceration rates have increased by 10%. So it seems as if more people are going to jail, and they're going to jail for longer periods. The added problem there is that there's more going into the system, and then there's a large percentage, probably around a third, that come out and then they go back in again because whilst they were in, they didn't have access to perhaps, the tools of rehabilitation, so they could have made some different life choices and come out and obviously lived a law-abiding life. So I think that's where the dilemma is, but certainly it's the increase in sentencing, and it's successive governments, Labour and Conservative, wanted to be tough on crime, which is understandable. It's a big vote winner as well, isn't it? But at the same time, they've been ignoring the problems within the system.
It's interesting, because I remember, when Michael Howard was Home Secretary, he always looked like a sort of fairly tough right-wing character. Then David Blunkett came along that made Michael Howard look like sort of a Jeremy Corbyn type. I mean, it was extraordinary. This is David Blunkett, the old socialist. And here he was being as, tough as you can get almost. And I suppose he was trying to address the sort of typical view that Labour government will be soft on crime, and they didn't want that to be the case, and maybe lost sight of who should or shouldn't go to jail. Well, listen, Johnny, your experience of this, I don't mean from your own experience of prison, but just as a prison reform advocate, who are predominantly the people that really shouldn't be in jail? It's where it's completely the wrong place for the punishment.
Well, it's difficult in a way, so far as I had a 12-year prison sentence, so I was away for 6 years. The first kind of year was really tough. I was in Wandsworth in London, very challenging, very brutal environment there. And then it got a little bit easier. A lot of prisoners, if they want to take that route and they want to think about engaging with education, they don't want to be committing crime whilst in prison, because a lot of them do. They smuggle phones in, they deal in drugs, etc. If you go that way, then obviously you've got the best chance of getting through and making a change at the end of it. The problem is otherwise it's like snakes and ladders. They go up the board and then they go down the snake when they get caught with a phone or there's an issue over their behaviour. So there is an argument to say that on short sentences, there's a huge impact on the offender there, insofar as if you went away for 6 months, then obviously you'd have tag after 3 months if it wasn't a violent offence or a domestic abuse case. But then at the same time, you've potentially lost your job, you've lost your rented apartment, you disengage with family members, etc. So they can be more disruptive potentially than a longer sentence like my own, because I had a long sentence. I had to just get on with it and try and make the very best of a bad situation. So you could argue that shorter terms, but at the same time you need to ensure that the probation service who deal with those offenders on the outside are resourced and equipped to deal with very challenging circumstances. I still sign on at Barrier Probation Service in South Wales, and when I go to Barrier Probation, there's people there going to do urine tests to ensure that they're not taking drugs. But there needs to be more controls there, because what we don't want as a society is people not having a deterrent effect of it. If you've got lower level offenders who just know that they're not going to go to jail, why are they going to make different choices in their life? So we need to be need to be careful of how we look at it and how we approach the problems within probations as well as in prisons.
Yeah, and do we make enough use? I mean, you mentioned people who are on tags. I've always thought it was I mean, of course, tags exist. I don't know what the data would be. Probably thousands of people are on tags. There's hundreds at least at the moment. But tags and curfews always seem to be like the most obvious way to address certainly whether it's one type of criminality or certainly a type of prisoner, where that could be equally, it could feel like a punishment if you can't go out at night after 5:30 or 6 o'clock for the next 4 years. That'd be like being in one of those lockdowns again. Nobody wants that.
Yes.
So there would be a sense that you've done something wrong. It would curtail your social life because you'd never go out for a pint. You couldn't drink alcohol. I think tags can even pick that up these days. So you'd have punishment in there, but you wouldn't have to worry about prison. Why are we not making more use of tagging?
Well, it's a really good point, Ian, because at the end of the day, if you're tagged, it's only normally during the nighttime hours where you're not allowed to be out and about and causing trouble.
Yeah.
During the daytime, you can go to work, you can function, you can carry on paying your rent. So if we do use, obviously, home detention curfews as a form of punishment, I was a white-collar criminal. My criminality was very severe. So it was deserving of a custodial sentence. But
this was financial fraud of some kind. I can't remember.
Yeah, I was a solicitor.
You were the lawyer, right?
Banking fraud. Yeah. So I had a 12-year sentence. So I served six years of that. Sorry, I got an alarm going off here.
Do you need to get out?
No, I think we're okay. I think it's a test. Sorry about that. I teach at the University of Western. But for me, for perhaps lower level, criminals, then a home detention curfew would have worked very well. It would have worked well for me, but there's no way on earth the judge would have ever given me that. So I think working with different ways of punishing, as you suggest, home detention and whatever, and community orders would be a definite way to deal with that sort of more lower level criminality, certainly not the more significant cases like mine and the violent cases, etc., where, as you say, there is a significant a proportion of prisoners who deserve to be in because of the threat that they pose to the public.
Indeed. On that point, listen, Johnny, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Glad the fire alarm was just a practice as well. Johnny Gilbert, prison reform advocate. In fact, Johnny's a really good example of what I've always said about you can't just have a situation where, street kids gone wrong who turned into adult criminals who go robbing and nicking and stealing cars and, those horrendous people that do horrible things to you. Burgling your house is a massive criminal offence as far as I'm concerned, not always treated like that. But you can't just put those guys in jail and not put in the white-collar crimes. And Johnny was saying there, he was a solicitor in a fraud kind of setup where a lot of money stood to be gained. He would have been punished not just because it was a horrendous fraud that probably had victims as a result, albeit indirectly, but he was the flipping lawyer, so he kind of facilitated it, and the judge would have taken that into account. So I don't want to go, well, people like Johnny shouldn't go to jail, but that little scrote over there who's nicking bikes out the railway station car park on a day, he should go to jail. That wouldn't be fair either. But there's got to be a line when you say, can we not make this curfew tagging thing really effective? So you ain't going to drink alcohol, you're not going to do any of that stuff. Otherwise, the button goes off. You're not telling me they haven't got the capability. We live in the 21st century. It's an artificial intelligence world. You can park your car, you can drive into a car park and a camera will photograph you and photograph you as you leave. And if you haven't paid your ticket, you'll get a ticket for it. There's no individual, no human involved in the process, hardly. It's just very automatic. That's just one obvious example. App technology that can do all manner of things. They can't set up that because that would surely, there must be 20,000 people in prison that probably shouldn't be in prison, where prison isn't the right answer. But what you've got to make sure is what they get instead is not just a bit of community service. Because if somebody said, you've got to go and paint the fence around the old folks' home, which is usually the sort of archetypal example, you go, do you know what? I would have got 3 years in Belmarsh, but I've got to go and paint some fences instead. You take that every day of the week. It's got to be more than that. So you've got to have something where the person feels as if there is a punishment component to what they've done. So who are those people that shouldn't be in the chiller? And who are the ones we should make sure we lock away forever? I think that list is easier to compile than the other one. 0344 499 1000. This is Chris in Epsom. What have you got, Chris? Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Well, I've phoned up to talk about Ukraine. You had an excellent chap on earlier that pointed out the fact that we are actually at war. We have been. Putin's been attacking us with cyber. Don't forget the two poisonings with plutonium, one in Mayfair, one in Salisbury.
Yep.
He's been flying jets, and we've had to scramble our fighters to push them back. This is, people don't realise quite how serious this is, and we really do. That chap was absolutely right. I mean, it shows you they had no idea whatsoever. They've run the whole thing down, the MOD, since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So 1990 it's been, and it wasn't in great shapes back then. I remember I came out in 85, and there was cuts going on then.
Yep.
But we immediately need to stop the foreign aid bill. Just cut it. We need to ditch net zero, because we're not making an eighth worth of difference with our less than 1%, but we're bankrupting ourselves and we're bankrupting the country. And at this moment in time, we need to keep hold of all the finances we've got and start buying it. Because he's right. We can't build the manufacturing sites for the munitions and for the weapons and for the vehicles. We're going to have to take the off-the-shelf options from America. Now, they've already bought 10,000 AR-15s with interoperable rail systems.
Sure.
But we need to arm all the guys with that. That's an American-made weapon. It's an American munition, and believe me, they can ramp up. If we want rounds for those weapons, they've got them. So at least we could have that. And again, what a great idea. He's absolutely right. The Ukrainians should be training us on Salisbury Plain, because they're the ones that are actually dealing with what's happening in the field at the moment.
Indeed. Good point. Listen, Chris, I've got to run, but thank you. Great call, Chris in Epsom. Stay in touch, Chris. This came in from Just John. He says, without Russia, we'd have lost World War II, while Western Ukrainians rounded up 1.5 million Jews for the Nazis before they jumped sides when they realised the outcome of the war. We supplied the Russians then. Now we're supplying the grandchildren of Nazis in 2025. Yeah, I mean, by the way, if we're looking for consistency in, where people plant their flag or their allegiance, then that's a journey you better give up on before you start, because you'll never find it. Because, yeah, we supplied those people, and that militia group were trained by the Americans and the CIA, and these people were trained by the Brits and the SAS, and then they became our enemy, and then they became our friend. You'll find that wherever you go. But it's a good point, John, and the whole Russian element of freeing up concentration camps when they were discovered shouldn't be removed as well from the history, which maybe doesn't get talked about enough, but it's absolutely key. But that doesn't mean that because of that, today's leader, Putin, is a good guy, because he clearly ain't. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. We're going to go back to your calls in a couple of moments. But first, before we do, it's time once again to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000. Here it is.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 PM on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 PM on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
it's very telling that we seem to care more about the human rights of people coming to this country illegally than we do about the people who have built this country with their own, just incredible skills. It's staggering to me that we have in the United Kingdom people choosing between heating and eating. That is the UK in 2025. I do not understand how people are not out on the streets over this. It's just incredible to me.
So apparently this is going to be saving the UK government about $1 billion or something.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This one in from Peter says, I'm sick of being called a Putin apologist for pointing out simple facts and truths. It wasn't Putin who didn't abide by the Minsk agreements. It was the West who lied and strung him along. It wasn't Putin who overthrew the legitimate Ukrainian government, democratically elected. You love that word, democratic, but you never abide by it. I could go on, but it's pointless with someone like you. Well, I'm going to throw a little bit of that back to you, Peter. I don't give a hoot if we lie to Putin. He's a mad dictator who murders people, whether they're journalists, whether they're individuals, whether they're enemies, and is a wicked part of our current spectrum of leaders, along with many others, I should say, certainly not alone in that. And I think how you define it, Peter, some of which you say is absolutely bang on, but I don't think it really tells the full story. And I would imagine if you have looked into simple facts and truths, you would know that nuances are actually key to all of this. Certainly the Minsk agreement as well, which I think would bring you to a slightly different conclusion. Sue is in the Wirral. You think we can trust Putin, Sue?
Well, let's trust him as we can trust Zelensky. I think they're both as bad as one another, to be quite honest with you. What I am very concerned about is that our plank for Prime Minister goes around doling out money as if it's going out of fashion. This is the country now that Keir Starmer has said that he's going to give Ukraine $26 billion a year up till 2030. And this is the country that can't give the old age pensioners £300 to keep warm. Yep. So what I've always said about Keir Starmer and the likes of Tony Blair is this: they are great friends to the world, the whole world. They'll give money to Chagos, they'll give money to Ukraine, they'll give money, you name it, and they'll give money. And it's the British people who have to pay. And I understand why people in America voted Trump in. I understand exactly why. Because we look at Starmer and what we can see is a liar. A man who's kept his powder dry, a man who hasn't told people what he is. I know exactly what Keir Starmer is. He's evil as far as I'm concerned.
You think so? You think he's evil, or do you think he's... I think he's politically stupid. I think
he's evil, quite frankly. He's a Stalinist. He doesn't care what you vote for. Look what he's doing. He doesn't care. No, I think... As Russia, you asked me if I trust Russia. No, I probably don't trust Russia, but I don't trust the EU. The EU is corrupt. The EU stolen money from British people, $2 billion. And I want to know why it is that our Conservative government, Labour government, Liberal Democrats are not concerned about this money that's been stolen from the British people. Billions given to the EU, and that money can't be found.
When you say, you mean it can't be found in the audit?
I mean, yes, exactly, and that's the reason I voted to get out of the
Okay, no, that's fair enough, and there's always been a question mark over the auditing. I think they've apparently improved, but I don't hold your breath. Listen, I've got to move, but thank you, Sue, in the Wirral for that. Let's bring in the voice of doom. It's the political mystery voice bit. It's a brand new voice. I can't work out, I do know the answer to this one, by the way, I didn't the last couple. I can't work out whether this is easy or really, really, really tough. Have a listen.
And see something different.
No, I've just got an instinct that someone's going to get that like that. Here's the voice again.
and see something different.
So remember, don't phone in because there ain't no prize. You can message in if you want to take part. 87222 is where you'll find us. Here's the voice again.
And see something different.
If somebody gets that right and identifies whose voice that is, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If nobody does, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is one more time.
And see something different.
87222, good luck. Back to your calls. Charles is in Sussex. What have you got, Charles? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. While you're having a go about Putin being a liar and a dictator, can we also flip the coin and talk about Starmer, who would happily kill his own country for a few refugees, and a lying bunch of despots, as he is himself, who got in? At least the Russians knew who they were voting for.
Well, there is something in that, right? I mean, nobody in Russia could go to the ballot box and not be aware who the bloke in the Kremlin is.
Agreed.
So do you think there's a kind of synergy or a likeness between the two?
I think while you're saying you can't trust Putin as far as you could throw him, I don't think you could trust Starmer.
I don't. Yeah, I don't trust Keir Starmer at all. He comes from part of the worst corners of that political spectrum. I mean, I could look at examples of, who he usurps in terms of how awful he is as a leader. But the position he plays is that, and thinks, and I think you're hitting on it, is that he's on the side of right. He believes he's right, like Macron thought he was right, like Merkel thought she was right. That same harmonised groupthink, European, soft, and frankly rather dangerous, because look at where we're at.
I'm honestly just waiting for him to come out with the Blair story of, well, we think there might be a nut and bolt hiding under a bush, so let's call it a weapon of mass destruction.
Very good point. The mass destruction, the weapon is out there somewhere. Where will we find it? Charles, thank you very much indeed for that. More of your calls and comments on the way. 87222 if you're messaging. And the voice of doom. Will we get a winner? Here's the brand new voice.
And see something different.
Who is that? 87222 is the number. We'll go back to your calls in a few moments' time, right here on Talk. 3 o'clock now. Let's get the latest headlines.
Across the UK, on on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up at 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Good afternoon. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Lots to get through in this section. We are, of course, talking Russia. They say the first round of talks with the US happened down Saudi way, by the way, went very well. But the Kremlin has also warned the UK against putting troops on the ground, saying the move would be acceleratory. We're taking your responses on that. Asking the question, can the West ever trust someone like Vladimir Putin? I mean, look, can you trust many of these guys at all? I understand the spirit of that question. But specifically on him, is he a man we could do business with? Also this afternoon, failure to renew the Conservative Party could lead to the loss of our country and all Western civilization, says the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch. Has she got a point? Do you concur, or is it too little, too late to save the Conservative Party? Also this afternoon, taxpayers have been hit again by woke government spending with $8 billion wasted on projects like TikTok dancing, queer animals and pro-trans robots. I mean, come on, have some understanding. Who doesn't want to support a queer animal? When I say a queer animal, is that kind of new street parlance for a gay animal? Or is it just like, I don't know, like a sloth, because that is a queer mama, isn't it, right? That's a weird thing. We'll get more detail on that to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So the voice of doom before the news. We played you this voice.
And see something different.
Who is that? These are some of the answers. Pamela Anderson, Kate Andrews, Kim Kardashian. No. Nikki Haley, it is not. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, no. Meghan Markle, no. Holly Valance, no. Priti Patel, it is not. Caroline Levitt, is it Levitt or Leavitt? Leavitt, no. And Chris Whitty, yes! No, it's not. It's not Chris Whitty. Have a listen to the voice again.
And see something different.
It rolls over to tomorrow because nobody got it correct. There we are. Stand by for that. So, Kemi Badenoch has said our country and all of Western civilization will be lost if efforts to renew the Conservative Party fail. She was speaking at the Alliance for Responsible Citizen Conference in London. That's a kind of centre-right thinking, groups of people, thinkers, commentators, politicians, etc. She said British culture and identity are being undermined by some migrants and useful idiots in the UK. Two separate points, I think, she's making there. She also criticised European Convention on Human Rights, claiming it allows migrants to avoid deportation, citing the old chicken nugget case that we talked about so much last week. Let's speak with Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP, who's been at the conference as well. Tom, good afternoon to you. Just give us an idea then. I mean, I loosely defined what that conference is about. It happens in different places around the world. I mean, this is an annual thing. Who are the kind of people that attend, firstly?
Generally pretty robust individuals, conservative individuals from throughout the world who hold conservative beliefs and conservative values. So we've got people here from Canada, Australia. I had lunch with somebody from Finland, from Romania, and of course there's some Brits as well. But we've just had a really fascinating debate with Tony Abbott, Daniel Hannan, Michael Gove. This morning we've had Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage, Douglas Murray, Neil Ferguson. It's been a brilliant conference. It's the first time I've been here. I didn't really know what to expect when I came, but it's been pretty uplifting actually. I mean, some of the people I've met, you know, and a lot of us got similar views. We're deeply concerned about what's happening to Western civilization. We are very much anti-woke. We want our countries to be proud countries, to be proud of their history. And you know, I'm a proud Brit, you know, and I want you know young young people of this country in Britain to be proud to be British, to be taught about how great our country is and how great our history is, and to end this denigration we've seen of our history and our past. That needs to end. We need to push back strongly on it. And I think this conference has been about that.
It might be said by some, Tom, that Kemi Badenoch needn't worry about Conservative values and traditions, and neither should the Conservative Party, because Reform UK have got all of that stuff tied up. This is their fight, it's their territory, they have credibility in the game. Kemi, it will be argued, was part of the last administration where much of this stuff was allowed to grow, just talking about the kind of woke stuff. So, job done. We don't have to talk about renewing anything, because the Conservative Party is already broken and unfixable. Is that over the top or fair?
No one owns any territory. At this conference, we've got people from throughout the world, and I think it's important that people with the same values work together and coordinate their efforts to defeat the kind of government that we've got right now in the UK. You know, Kemi Badenoch spoke yesterday. I think it was a good speech. I think it was well received by the audience. And actually the point that she made, that not all cultures are the same, and actually the point that if you come to our country, you should be obligated to integrate. If you want to come here, you can come here if you make a positive economic contribution and you integrate in our country. If you come to our country and you look to impose your way of doing things on us, you are not welcome anymore. And she said it very clearly. I think that's a view which is shared by most people at this conference, and I was pleased to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, that's true enough. But, of course, there is a sense we've heard a lot of this before about shared values and singing from the same hymn sheet. I've been doing this job quite a long time, Tom, as you know, and I've lost count of how many times we've done this debate about, you know, trying to find a commonality. Can the 21st century even accommodate that anymore?
Look, the fight's never over. Okay, we're not in a good situation as a country at the moment. There's lots of challenges to the West, but we have to believe in our values. We have to believe in the greatness of how great this country can be. But look, I share your desire for action. You know, I'm sick of just hearing words. You know, I want to see action. I was a member of Parliament. I was in Parliament for 4.5 years, and I was like a broken record, saying that we need action. We need to take the most robust action possible to stop illegal migration, to stop the boats, to dramatically cut legal migration, because we've got to live in a cohesive society, and we only live in a cohesive society with shared values if those people who move here integrate. And too often we're seeing that that is not the case, and it is beginning to pick apart the fundamentals of a bedrock of values that have made this country great. Okay, we need to work together, those of like mind, to push back against this, and to the next available opportunity, bring down this useless Labour government.
And on that point, listen, Tom, great to have you with us. Enjoy the rest of the day over there at the conference. Tom Hunt, former Tory MP, he's been attending the Responsible Citizen Conference in London. It's all very common sense stuff, and he mentioned the list of names of people that were there. He talked about Douglas Murray was there, Nigel Farage was there, I think Tony Abbott, former Australian Prime Minister, was there. Who else? Tony Abbott was born here, wasn't he? Was Tony Abbott born in Lambeth? I'm sure he was born. Have I made that up? Not that that matters, by the way, but maybe he's got a dual nationality. I was just wondering whether he got stopped at the airport. Don't know. He was born in Lambeth, and so was John Major. Was John Major born in Lambeth? I think John Major was born. I don't know why we're going down this trivia rabbit hole, but it's worth checking out this stuff. Anyway, they all got together. Lots of people who are more sort of centre-right or conservative thinkers from around the world. Some really big names there from very persuasive characters. Some people that you listen to and go, they speak common sense. That makes sense. I thought when J.D. Vance visited Europe this week, he was in Munich, there were some issues around what he said that really upset a lot of people in the EU establishment, to the point that one of them cried. I mean, if ever you wanted, I mean, talk about playing to your hands. J.D. Vance goes, you know, both barrels on what is wrong. Nobody voted for this, he said, talking about mass EU immigration. Not a single person in Europe that went to the ballot box and voted for this. And he is 100% correct. Even if you want to allow for some nuances and understanding, and if you're going to champion or endorse a reasonable migration policy, etc., nobody voted for what has happened in the EU. in that respect. And he pointed that out. And I know he got a few facts and figures a little bit skew but broadly speaking, he was simply arguing for a bit of common sense, right? You know, do what people want, not this select group of group-thinking Herberts that get together and preen their virtuous whiskers with each other as they sit around. And you've got, I mean, the kind of Trudeau-y type character that sits there on the world stage, believing that the side of morality is with them in all that they do. Anything they do, you can put Macron in there and the Blairs and Jacinda Ardern and those kind of characters who, whilst in their own countries might represent a plethora of different ideologies, you put them together and they've sort of stumbled across this settled view on stuff that doesn't, and they don't think they need to really refer it to anyone because they are so convinced of their own sense of decency and rightness that why would they not be right? Why would they not be right? And Vance has come along and went, do you know what? It's a flipping basket case over here. We don't even know what you guys are anymore. And he fired the barrels, and off they went. And when one of the head honchos who was running the conference had to respond, he cried. And if you ever want to prove a man's point, then there it was. He flipping cried. He called me hurty words. It was that. Man alive. Georgina is down in London. Georgina, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Well, I'm not going to cry, that's for sure.
That's good to hear.
I just want to say that President Trump does not want the EU wokerati or Starmer within a farmer's mile downwind of these peace negotiations. This is not Trump's first rodeo. He knows what he is doing, and he's doing a great job so far, not just with this, but with everything for his people in the USA. When you have two powerful forces like Trump and Putin sitting around a negotiating table, there's going to be more testosterone than a bull elephant. And Starmer wants to be a middleman. He's more of a wicker man. He will crash and burn. The only worthwhile job he could do in that situation would to be bringing the refreshments. The EU have had 3 years to get the ball rolling on this situation, and they have done nothing. Now that Trump's taken the reins, they'll all want to jump on the resolution bandwagon. You know, I mean, Donald Trump is going to make sure that he puts in caveats in any forthcoming peace treaty to ensure that both Putin and Zelensky will go forward without threat of future unrest.
But would it be fair to say, though, Georgina, because I think you're probably bang on, but there are other parties. I mean, even putting Ukraine aside, which sounds a bit strange when we're talking about the future of Ukraine, but for the purpose of just this conversation, the continent of Europe, should that be involved somewhere here, bearing in mind this is a battle that's being fought on the doorstep of Europe?
It will be involved. I think what Trump is trying to do, he knows he is dealing with a huge ego with Putin. He's got a huge ego himself, so he knows exactly how to deal with this guy. So what he's trying to get is what Putin wants out of it and what Donald Trump can make work for Zelensky. Then he will go back to the EU and Zelensky and say, look, this is what I've negotiated so far. Tell me what you think of this. Then they can start back and forth and sorting this mess out. I mean, I think Starmer's being really premature by volunteering our soldiers to put boots on Ukraine for peacekeeping purposes, when it will be our money, the taxpayer, paying for it, and our sons and daughters over in the Ukraine. Our defence is underfunded. Our soldiers need equipment. We need at least 5% GDP instead of 2.5. Starmer would do well sorting out the ever-increasing problems we already have, Ian, here in the UK, rather than deflecting his attentions again elsewhere.
So do you sense that when he made this point about boots on the ground, he was talking about European countries and us, was this his attempt to kind of find a place in the debate?
You are spot on. I wasn't going to say that, but you know what? You've hit the nail on the head. This is about people looking at Starmer thinking, oh, yeah, he's a man of action. I'm sorry, those days are gone. We have lost confidence in that man, total confidence. The best thing he could do for us now is resign and let someone who can do the job do the job.
There it is. Georgina, thank you very much indeed for that. More comments from you, Paul in Fife. We keep hearing that the migrant hotels are necessary because of the backlog of asylum claims. So what happens when the backlog is cleared? Where the hell do they all go? It's a great point, isn't it? I was watching that Channel 4 programme where they send a group of people of different political backgrounds into areas like Syria. Chloe Dobbs, one of the commentators we have on the programme a lot, is one of the people featured in it. And they encounter, obviously, locals. But I only caught, I think it's been on for about 3 or 4 weeks. I only caught a little bit, or 3/4 of last night's episode. So I wasn't quite sure where else they've been or what the bigger story was, but they were certainly in Syria and they were in Italy, and they were talking to migrants who were trying to get over from different countries like Syria and Africa, etc. And it was fascinating to see. So the people that are involved in it are, so you'd have somebody like Chloe, who I was just talking about, who's kind of more of a right-wing thinker, a very independent right-wing thinker, a young female. Then you've got a middle-aged male who's also of the right. Then you've got a sort of youngish female who's very much of the left. And they're all kind of put into this, it's not really a challenge, it's an experience to see, I guess, if their minds change on things. And the reason I raised that is because there was one point in it when the lorry driver, I think, was he from Burnley, I think? Proper, big guy, 6'2", full of tattoos, proper working class lad, loves a bit of Brexit, loves his country, patriotic, loves his kid, a hard-working man, probably puts all the hours you can imagine in. And the voice of many, many people. But he was talking to one of the migrants in the queue, this fella called Mohammed, who I think was from Syria. And Mohammed used to work in Syria, and he wants to work if he came to the UK. And what was interesting was that although this guy from Burnley, the trucker, kind of slightly had his mind changed a little bit, because I think he previously thought that everybody just wants to come here and do nothing. So he suddenly thought, well, actually, this guy Mohammed does want to do something. But I said to my other half when we were watching it, so the guy said, yeah, why did you leave Syria? Well, there's nothing there for me. I couldn't really get a job, etc. And I thought, OK, that's interesting, because that must be a horrible thought that you're going to live your life. And it was only a young guy in his maybe mid to late 20s, yet you'd rather be elsewhere. I understand that. I understand that you don't like the regime. You think it's, a place that's a basket case and it's going to take decades to get it back to normal. I understand that as well. And I understand that fulfilling your career is probably difficult. And I understand that if you made it to the UK or France, I understand you want to work and you want to integrate. But none of those things are a reason to give somebody the right to have residency. They might be persuasive, they might break your heart a little bit, but on the big list of human rights abuses, the fact that you can't get a job in Carphone Warehouse, it's not really up there, And I'm sure there are other, I don't want to be too cynical of this guy, but it did make me think when we look at people coming across the channel, I think the story that this Mohammed guy told about his own predicament, I think that's more typical than anything. I think that is your typical story. And why would we not have that in the 21st century? People go, well, I want to move somewhere else. I come from a hellhole. I don't want to live there anymore. There's no opportunities. The education isn't brilliant. The workplace isn't brilliant. Yeah, sure, I get it. You want to go elsewhere. Not reasons to be granted asylum. And that's what we're dealing with. 0344 499 1000. That was all connected with Georgina's last call, as you might have gathered. And Mark in Suffolk says, loving the show. Georgina for Prime Minister. Yeah, I'll go with some of that, Mark. Thank you. 0344 499 1000.
There's a general consensus across the political parties about the architecture that should apply to the railways, and it's been there for over 5 years, going back before COVID. So why we do the consultation now is beyond me, because I'm afraid, if I can be cynical, governments tend to launch consultations when they want to be seen to be doing something and they're actually doing nothing.
Exactly. That was my worry. I'm quite glad that you've kind of confirmed it for me. I mean, everybody knows that the railways are in a bit of sort of jeopardy, shall we say. You know, we're paying people an awful lot of money to work on them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. 23 minutes after 3 o'clock. Let's go to Baz in Hull. How you doing, Baz?
Hi, I'm doing all right. Well, considering Keir Starmer's in power, I think I'm doing quite well.
I know. We should really check in with each other, shouldn't we, every day, to our fellow humans around us. How are you? Which is a question really based on considering we're run by Keir Starmer.
Anyway, I wanted to say about Keir Starmer, look, I do support Ukraine and I do support Israel, but what is Keir Starmer actually playing at? I mean, why does Ukraine, Israel and Mauritius seem more important to Keir Starmer? I care about Ukraine and I care about Israel, but as a British national, I care more about Britain. And for some reason, Keir Starmer doesn't seem to. He doesn't seem to understand that there's people... He can't even acknowledge what is going on in front of his eyes. He's not even aware that there's people in this country in crisis. There's people in this country who cannot get a doctor's appointment. There's people who are on waiting list for waiting list for waiting list. There's people who can't get appropriate council housing. And it's like with Mauritius, sir. It gives Mauritius Kagos Island and then gives them £18 billion, then gives them another £12 billion. Like, what on earth is he... I mean, come on.
I don't think, I've said this forever, to be honest, Baz. I don't think people like Keir Starmer, they don't come from a place where they think that stuff matters. It's just not in their DNA, it's just not in his head or his heart.
And Keir Starmer don't care about the British people. He cares about his ego and his bank account. Those are the two most important things to Keir Starmer. Anything else is not a priority.
And of course, the greatest error, if that's the right word, is believing that just by not being the Conservatives, he could be a successful leader. And there is nothing about Keir Starmer that smacks of success or panache. Even if you didn't you might not have liked Tony Blair, you could say, when he was out there on the stage, he kind of looked the part to some people, but he doesn't tick that box, right? He doesn't have any of that going on. He sounds like a man that's out of touch. He doesn't understand the needs of working people. He looks like a bloke that would put, he keeps talking about country before party. He's putting planet Earth before country, right? He's putting other countries before our country.
And when he's questioned about something, what's going on in this country, he can't even string a sentence together. He can speak nice and fluently when it's a plan for another country. When it's this country, it's always stammering. He can't, he can't put a few words together. He's not believable at all.
He's not.
Trust a word what leaves his mouth.
It's a great point. He's not believable. And country before party. He just didn't tell us which country he was talking about. Baz, I've got to move. Thank you, Baz in Hull. Jen is in Devon. How you doing, Jen?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. What have you got for us?
Well, I think Starmer is confused. I think he thinks he's better than what he is. And
100%.
And to put our lads into Ukraine, is not right. Stop throwing our youth away. Putin has thrown his youth away. Now he's struggling. He's got no army. It's, okay, years ago they said that we were going to have all these rockets, we didn't need army, all this coming in, banging into us and everything else.
Sure.
And it's all wrong. It's all wrong. They're liars. Putin has to be stopped. It has to be stopped. And so should be Starmer. because I actually think he's living Adolf Hitler's life. And that's saying something.
Yeah. Do you think, and this is a big ask for anyone to rethink often what's clearly in front of us, Putin is not a good man. Is it possible that in all of this, that there could be peace in that part of the world? And bizarrely, Putin will play his part, Trump will play his part, and Zelensky will play his.
He will have to back down because he realises he's up against it.
Yeah. But he's got to get something out of it, hasn't he? He's got to go back to the Russian people and go, look, we now run this. Ukraine will look very different.
I feel sorry for the Russian people.
Yeah.
I feel very, very sorry. They lost the lads.
Yeah.
You know, and all he keeps doing is beating them and beating them. He's got to stop.
100%. Jen, thank you. Jen in Devon. 0344 499 1000. One from Dave in Walthamstow. Enjoying the show. Thank you, Dave. He says, Rishi Sunak left office saying we were entering dangerous times. This has been coming for a long time. What I don't understand is why we as a country are being pushed along the nut zero when we may not have much of a country left because of very poor home security and such a lack of fighting age people who want to fight for this country. Maybe that's the point. Making the country into an island-based power station that is a supplier to the EU and will all be working in the state factory, doing nothing but attempting to march on big hamster wheels, creating energy for the French. That might end up being where we're all at in a sort of Huxley-like way. We'll all have the same job. We'll take our little tablet every day that will give us our vitamins and make us feel just nice. And we'll move along. Everything will be fine. Graham says, if peace is declared with Russia, do you reckon our fuel bills will go down again? Or am I a dreamer? Says Graham in Leeds. Well, that should follow. It should follow, shouldn't it, to a degree, although most of our energy doesn't come... There's only a small amount we get from Russia, but knock-on effects and all that. Dan in Kent referenced a previous comment. If you weren't listening, it won't make sense, but it does to me. Rachel Reeves as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Well, she's definitely somewhere over the rainbow. That's for sure. And surrounded by munchkins, perhaps. And this one in from Reg. Why is it that when I hear you say collective responsibility, all I can hear is Starmer? Does sound like a very sort of, it's what under the laws of collective responsibility, you can almost hear him wheeling that out. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. We're going to come back to more from you in a couple of moments' time. Lots to come. Keep it here. 3:30. It's Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk. Lots to get through. 0344 499 1000. And this story, which we've kind of teased up a little bit over the last couple of hours. Extraordinary goings on in the waste money department. Taxpayers are footing the bill for £8 billion. £8 billion in woke government spending. The list is really interesting of the kind of things that are on that list. We've got TikTok dances, queer animals, pro-trans robots, according to the Taxpayers Alliance. This comes amid calls to boost defence spending and cut NHS waiting lists, with some demanding a US-style efficiency department like Elon Musk's. Let's speak with Elliot Keck, Head of Campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Afternoon to you, Elliot.
Afternoon, Ian.
I mean, come on, who doesn't want to endorse and spend some money on some pro-trans robots? We've all been there.
Well, listen, this is precisely the problem, and this virtue signalling nonsense is likely to be the virtue signalling nonsense that I'm afraid Labour ministers agree with. I think we should say that a lot of these programmes have started under the Tories, but there's no doubt that Labour ministers agree with a lot of this stuff ideologically. But listen, ultimately, they only have so much money to spend if they don't want to raise more taxes. And if they, genuinely believe that spending money on this stuff is more important than spending money on defence and spending money on more hip operations, on policemen, then, they shouldn't be in politics, in my view.
Indeed. And where is this money coming from? Is this one specific department, or is this across different authorities or departments in Westminster? How is this $8 billion figure kind of reached? Is it across the board?
Yeah, so this is a quanga called UK Research and Innovation that sits inside Department of Science and Innovation and Technology. Irony that it sits inside the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, given some of the things that we're talking about, and that money goes to a number of what's called research councils. So some of them are entirely legitimate research councils doing proper high-level medical scientific research, but I'm afraid a big chunk of it, hundreds of millions of pounds, goes towards essentially useless guff like this.
Yeah, and I mean, the queer animal thing, I was trying to work out what that is. I mean, when they were saying queer animals, was it the kind of colloquial term for being gay that has sort of now developed a kind of accepted street parlance? Or are they talking about just weird animals like sloths?
Listen, I think the problem with trying to get a grips with some of these research programs is that there's not really much point, because I don't think even the researchers know what they're talking about. I mean, another one is looking at the way that dance has become more online through TikTok. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. Another one that we found about a few months ago, last year, was £800,000 to decolonise the works of Robert Louis Stevenson. And there's many other people, Charlotte Gill, for example, who have spotted some fairly extraordinary programs, one on the Europe that gay porn bill. So, listen, these are all absolutely nonsense programs. I don't think it's even worth reading the abstract. I think it's just worth looking at how much money goes towards it and taking that money back, frankly.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about the gay porn thing. I mean, it's amazing what you can, get a grant for, or a donation. And these are organisations that sit there, in different parts of the country or different parts of the world sometimes. And you just essentially put in an application, right? You say, look, this is the work we're doing. We think this is, and one assumes you have to, write a little 500 words on what this money will go towards and why it's important that the British taxpayer should be funding TikTok dances or pro-trans robots research, etc. And then some very worthy people, probably far more worthy than you and me, Elliot, they sit around a big table, probably with a fine glass of Merlot, deciding, yes, I think we'll give it to the queer animals this week. And they give you the sort of Caesar-like thumbs up or down, and the money, ka-ching, goes into your bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a panel that makes decisions on each of these grants, and this panel is supposed to consider value for money for taxpayers, but they clearly throw that out the window after probably the second or third glass of Merlot. But, the really frustrating thing is that, looking at UK Research and Innovation, it funds an extraordinary amount of very high quality work, but every penny that it spends on, useless nonsense like this is a penny wasted, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd think there'd be, I don't know, why is there not more noise about this? I mean, you guys do a great job at uncovering this kind of stuff and talking to people like me, so the word is out there. But you might think this would be, I mean, if this was in Elon Musk's office right now, I mean, none of these things would exist by about 4 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the problems is for a long time people have just assumed that you can't do anything about this, that no one's ever going to do anything about it. And now that we have Elon Musk in government in the United States, people have actually realised you can do something about it. So, there are other voices that have joined the TPA over the last year or two. Charlotte Gill's doing brilliant work. The Spectator have just set up a new programme, as have Guido Fawkes. So there are more people that are now starting to wake up to the fact that, no, we don't have to accept that vast amounts of our money are being wasted on virtue signalling nonsense. We can actually do something about it.
Well, we will watch and see, although I don't hold my breath under this government. But Elliot, thank you. Elliot Keck is head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. A bill of 8 billion quid in woke government spending. And as Elliot said, the problem with this is that it gets kind of mixed in with an area where good money is spent, money is spent for a good reason. But how would you... I mean, look, is there stuff we don't know? Are we too stupid? Are we the little people here that don't understand why TikTok dances might require a thumping donation for the British taxpayer? Or queer animals? I'm trying to get my head around with the queer animal thing. What is that? What is it? I'm assuming, looking at how some of these organisations work, that is the queer as in the street parlance that is used, which I find slightly... I don't want to say I find it offensive, that's the wrong word. I find it's a bit weird, isn't it? The queer thing, the re-hijacking of the word and etc. I understand why somebody might want to, but queer animals, what are we looking at here? And of course, there are no gay animals, I should just say, so I can save them all the research. They don't have to do that. You don't get that gay stuff going on. With penguins, they hate all of that. They're quite homophobic, the penguins. Not everything is black and white in their world, believe me. So they're not happy with that kind of stuff. And I think owls as well take a rather dim view of that, regardless of the progress that's been made in the human world. I am clueless. I do not know where this money came from, how it was allowed, or what was the green light, or what kind of pressing work needs to be done in order to establish. Matt's in Cheshire. Matt, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Just bear with me, I'm a little bit congested. I've got a bit of a cold.
Oh, one of that bit of old man flu going on, yeah.
Can I just say, firstly,
yeah,
Vladimir Putin is not my enemy, but my own Prime Minister is more like my enemy than Vladimir Putin.
Interesting. Go on.
There were three I would say former lefty Oliver Stone did 3 2-hour interviews with Putin. I think it was about a decade ago now.
Okay.
Nobody in the Western world seems to have watched these videos. I watched all 3 of them. And in the interviews, he more or less said that if NATO continues to encircle Russia and move towards its borders and put weapons near its borders, he will defend the Russian borders and push back. He then reiterated the exact same comments in the Tucker Carlson interview. Nowhere in between has he ever said anything different. He also said during the Tucker Carlson interview he never has any plans to attack anyone else in Europe ever unless they attack him. And there's no evidence of anything such like that apart from, there's no intention of doing any of those things. So all we hear constantly is the Western media and Labour and the Democrats, all war hawks, all that took us into Iraq, took us into Afghanistan, created terrorism in Europe between them. They're all now the same people that are now
denouncing Putin. It would be said, just by way of what I hope is a healthy counter to some of that, man, people would say, well, OK, that's all very well, but if I was a journalist and I, looked a bit skew-if from the Kremlin and I was there in Red Square having a latte and writing up my notes, there's a good chance I could be arrested, imprisoned and not see the light of day for about 30 years. If I was a former enemy of Putin and I happen to be doing business, I don't know, let's take Salisbury as a random town, I might end up, 6 feet under. There are other ways that Putin operates that, OK, I agree with what you said about Starmer, but I don't think even Keir would go down to the poison umbrella department.
No, I agree with all that, Ian. I'm not saying he's not a bad man at heart. I'm not saying he isn't. What I'm saying is all Russia have ever wanted since World War II is the respect of the West. Let's face it, our freedoms are based on their sacrifices, and all we've ever heard since the 50s onwards is the Democrats and the American intelligence agencies and our sheep throughout Europe criticise them, constantly call them names. Russophobia is endemic throughout the Western media, and while the Labour are on their knees about Islamophobia, they're simultaneously talking Russophobia every day. And the only person that listens to Putin is Trump. And Trump will sit down with him and talk to him. And I'm pretty sure in a series of meetings, while all these people are losing their minds throughout the Western world, there will be peace in a couple of months. And while Zelensky's sulking like a big baby because his money's not pouring in daily, that pushback into Ukraine was just a pushback of a border that was pushing onto Russia's land that he mentioned originally in those Oliver Stone interviews.
I'm going to watch that. I haven't seen those, but they sound like something that should be watched. Listen, Matt, thank you. It's a really interesting, or very well put point, I think, from Matt. Well, I mean, there will be others. So hang on a second. Putin is Matt, if you would talk to many of the guests we've spoken to who've had dealings with Putin, they will arguably tell you, a very different story. Try to judge a man by the kind of company he keeps, and it ain't looking too clever over there in Red Square in that respect. But I hear what Matt is saying. You could kind of put the Keeler response in there. Putin would say that, wouldn't no intention of doing X, Y, and Z. Well, if you don't consider what you're doing an invasion, then you can go to sleep at night, Vlad, and say, well, I didn't invade. I just took what was actually ours. So a bit of, just Georgia and a bit of Ukraine. So it's already ours. I'm just taking it back. There's a few other places on the list, but we'll save those for a few years down the line. 0344 499 1000. Alan in Nottingham. This is on fly tipping, because there was a story about lots of fly tipping going on beaches now. Alan says, increased fly tipping in this country is just another symptom of the breakdown of social cohesion and structures. People are voting with their actions now. They've had enough of duplicitous, disconnected and unaccountable governments and the failure of the police and justice services. Can't see this ending well. Yeah, there is a real sense that there is a sort of decline. And I hate that idea that we're not in buoyant mood. And again, you think back to 1997, if you were around at the time in 1997, when Blair came into power, and so many Conservatives will echo this point as well. The Tory government had been in power since 1979. I mean, just let that settle for a second. And so come 1997, suddenly there's new kids in town. And they're not looking like mad socialists at this point. They're looking like a breath of flipping fresh air. The Tories, even if you were a diehard Tory, were looking knackered and decrepit and, criminal and just out of ideas, out of energy. What do they stand for anymore? And so this Blair guy comes along. And also a lot of other things were going on. Britpop was finding its way. The world of opportunity had taken a new turning. The economy was in good nick. So in 1997, when Blair came in, things can only get better, put a bit of park life in there subsequently. It all looked and felt kind of quite positive, even if you might have been looking at it in a temporary fashion. There was a sense of rejuvenated nation, a sense of a new beginning. A rebirth of the UK. And I think it was slightly false. I think it was maybe temporary, but there was that sense. We didn't get any of that with Starmer, did we? Even though many of the circumstances are pretty similar in terms of the previous Tory government, etc. The fag end of that government looking tired, weak, knackered and out of ideas. We got none of that from Starmer, none at all. So there is a sense, we can pick it up. We're a great country. We are a country that functions and gets through battles. We've been through the biggest that countries can go through over our history. We can do it again, I'm sure. 0344 499 1000. I'll tell you what might help put a smile on your face as well. Bit of extra cash, right? Who doesn't like a bit of extra cash when it's free and it comes your way? Wow. This is how you can, and you could very easily be the recipient. You could be the winner. Time to find out now how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 PM on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 PM on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, Keir Starmer is a desperate Prime Minister in search of a good war, knowing entirely well that it is a completely fake proposal. Keir Starmer knows completely well that you can't send some kind of raggle-taggle gypsy crew of willing volunteers from around Europe to go to Ukraine to, as he puts it, be peacekeepers, because there's no structure within which to do that.
Right.
Who would command them?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Neil, Stoke-on-Trent. It would be more convincing if Starmer looked at the camera instead of seemingly looking at a scripted answer that somebody had written for him. Yeah, he was holding that kind of bit of paper in his hand. I know politicians make a lot of speeches. You can't rehearse every one of them so that verbatim you can repeat it, but it did look a bit strange, I agree. Fern in Glasgow says, why does there have to be a military presence set up containing personnel from Europe when NATO already exists? Sounds like the creation of another level of military that we're expected to pay for that we do not need. Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I don't think Starmer didn't refer specifically to NATO, did he? He might have been on perhaps more stable ground if he'd have said, yeah, there should be a NATO presence. Or is the word NATO, or could that be interpreted in kind of quite a threatening manner? Would that escalate it further than the Russians have already accused him of? Mark in Norwich, what would be so bad about a British peacekeeping force, you ask? Are you joking? Starmer can't even stop the dinghies coming across the channel. How is he going to put together a peacekeeping force to keep Russia at bay? That's like the guy who permanently has to use a Zimmer frame saying that he's going to run the London Marathon in world record time. I mean, that's a nice little comparison. In fairness, I don't think Starmer was talking about us doing it on our own. I think he was saying, look, if we're going to do this, then I would be prepared to put British troops there clearly alongside others. I think that's the thinking. But maybe not. Who knows? Jake says, let's frame it like this. Zelensky got voted in, decided he wanted to be part of NATO. Putin told him not to try because there would be repercussions. He did exactly that and then wondered why Putin invaded. He's been warmongering ever since. I'll tell you why he isn't at the talks. He won't get his way. He liked Biden because he was easy to manipulate. Every single Ukrainian I've spoken to within Devon hates Zelensky. We need to be very careful how we proceed as a country. That may well be true. I think there's many, perhaps so many more, I think it would be fair to say, Jake, that aren't that struck on Putin, though. But there's something in that. I've always thought there was a kind of big sort of almost false adoration and worship of Zelensky. You know, it's the bloke that wears that jumper and a pair of combats who turns up to big summits where everyone else is in a dinner jacket and a bow tie. That bloke, I've never liked that. I've always thought that is, you know, it's kind of a bit of an act. It always looks like, I suppose, he's working, and maybe that's part of it. And I don't for one say, he's a politician, I distrust all of them. That is the starting position for all of these people, whether they are Putin, Trump, Zelensky, or anyone else. Some, it's more obvious than others that you can instantly recognise they're people who are fairly venal characters who you wouldn't trust out the back mowing the grass. Others take a bit more analysis, a bit more of a long game. But Zelensky certainly isn't somebody that I look at and think as some kind of archangel of all things peaceful and great and good. Not for 1 second. Let's get a voice note on Ukraine from Darren.
Quick one on what you're talking about with us supporting or boots on the ground with Ukraine, whatever. We can't do it. We haven't got the resources. And to put it into perspective, there are more civil servants employed by the Home Office and the Ministry of Defence than we've got soldiers in the entire country.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. There are soldier issues, although Bill just says, why can't the UN provide peacekeepers? Well, I mean, they're about as famous in that respect as you can get, the UN peacekeeper. Nobody knows what the heck the United Nations is supposed to do. But if you gave me 5 minutes and a cup of tea and a biscuit to try and work out, you know, the top 3 things that the UN might do, I'd go, yeah, they're the guys in the white, aren't they? They've got the white helmet, they're UN peacekeepers. Yeah, that's what they do. Yeah, where's those dudes when you need them? Wouldn't that make more sense if that's the path you wanted to go down? This one in from Vincent. You cannot believe a word out of Putin's mouth. Best get troops and long-range rockets this side of the border to let him know. No stuffing around. I understand that as well. Alex in Devon, you speak about Starmer and then say Putin is mad. The irony. How about having an online poll on who you would trust more, Starmer or Putin? We already have British boots in Ukraine, but it doesn't end too well for them. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd be voting. I wouldn't want to vote for either, but there's no way that Putin would get my vote on trust. I mean, if you want to get into free speech arguments, I think that would be an obvious place to start, if nothing else. Peter says, surely if you put significant numbers of British troops on the Russian border, then it must give Putin an easy opportunity to obliterate our army without attacking the UK. Well, they would be there as peacekeeping troops, as distinct from troops in action. So that would be the answer. And John in London, a ceasefire in Ukraine is bad news for China as the US can focus on Chinese expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you, John, for that. That's almost it from us. Peter Cardwell is here.
Hello.
Right, you're here all week, apparently.
I am indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wasn't here yesterday.
Well, you're back now, which is wonderful.
Absolutely. It was just a day off because it's half term and the kids were around. You know, you've got to do your fatherly duties.
Was one day enough?
There was no, because when you're off, you just think, especially when you're with 2 kids all day on your Todd as a you just think, I need a day off to get over that.
I know what you mean. Yes,
it's not easy.
I do know someone close to me. I'll not say who it is. Wouldn't want to mention my brother's name. Who occasionally just books himself into a travel lodge just for one night.
Does he?
Yeah, just very occasionally. You know, he'll have
respite.
He'll have a business trip for 3 nights and then just do one more night just to chill.
Well, I do get that. It's funny yesterday because I brought the kids up into London and we were round here, you know, looking at stuff.
Yeah.
And we're about to go back for the train, so I walked past it and I thought, my little boy had said loads of times, I'd love to go into your workplace. And but you know, he's ginger, so I'm not sure that's fair on everybody else, is it? But I thought, do I bring them in? But that could be. I should have done. Yeah. Well, you'd have been on air, you know, at that time.
That's all right. They could bring them in, ask them their opinions on Ukraine.
Yes. What do you think? What do you think of President Putin?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, what's happening this afternoon?
Well, we are asking people what they think of President Putin, and I know you've been asking whether they would trust him to do a deal. Certainly, Zelensky doesn't, so we'll ask about that. We'll get more on that, but in just a couple of minutes' time, I can't tell you too much now, but in a few minutes' time, we've got a big exclusive coming on the Chagos Islands. We've been working on this for a couple of days here at Talk.
Okay.
And we're going to bring you all the details of that in just a few minutes, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. We'll talk to Mark Francois, the Shadow Defence Minister, about Ukraine. Loads of stories around. I know you've been covering them about the government squandering £8 billion on TikTok dancing. Actually, one of those dancing classes, if you went to it, they give you